Chapter 2028. However, he suddenly recalled his long-awaited reaction last night. Vaguely, he seemed to be hugging a pillow or something and rubbing it a few times. Could it be? Looking at Shen Manting's expression, Shen Luowen suddenly had a bad feeling. Could it be that the person he rubbed against last night was actually the same person? He felt a little strange, but when he saw Shen Manting's angry expression, he deliberately looked away and said, "Did I kick you off the bed?" Nanny He and Mrs. Shen laughed. Shen Longyue sat at the dining table and looked over. Shen Manting was annoyed by their laughter. She frowned and said, "How dare you say that? Why did you imitate others when you can't drink? Not only were you drunk, but you also lay in the bathtub and refused to get up. If I hadn't sacrificed my sleep time to wake you up, you would have slept in the bathtub all night." After being reminded, Shen Luowen seemed to have some recollection of it. It seemed he was really drunk. Shen Luowen felt guilty, but he still refused to admit his mistake. He looked at Shen Manting's face and snorted coldly. "If that's the case, why don't you let me sleep in the bathtub? It's cool and comfortable to sleep in the bathtub." Shen Manting felt that he was unreasonable. She stood up with the baby in her arms and decided to ignore him. Shen Luowen looked at her and started eating the orange. Nanny He quickly cooked the hangover soup. When she came over, she glared at Shen Luowen and said, "Can't you say something nice?" "What can I say?" Shen Luowen was amused. He looked at the bowl of hot soup and said, "I have a headache. Help me get some painkillers." "You'll be fine after drinking some hangover soup. You can lie down later." Nanny He wiped her hands and said, "Eat your breakfast after you're done. Drinking too much is not good for your stomach." "Got it." Shen Luowen picked up the bowl and drank it with a frown. After a while, he went to the table. Shen Manting had already put the baby back. After a night of playing, her stomach was already growling. But when she was about to eat breakfast, she saw Shen Luowen sitting at the table. She had originally walked out of the room, but she turned back. Shen Luowen frowned when he saw this, but he didn't say anything. After eating a little, he got up and went back to his room to lie down like a corpse. Shen Manting was packing the baby's clothes into a pile. When she saw Shen Luowen enter, she carried them to the next room and placed them in the disinfectant cabinet. Shen Luowen could tell. This woman is hiding from me again. Feeling unhappy, she covered her head with the blanket and closed her eyes. But he couldn't fall asleep no matter what. He tossed and turned in bed for a while, trying to recall the scene from last night. But as soon as he thought about it, his head started to hurt. Motherf ****. It turned out that there really was such a thing as blacking out after drinking. His tongue was also in pain. It was obvious that he had bitten it. Wait, I have to sort this out first. Shen Manting looked at him as if she had seen a wolf or a leopard. It was impossible that she had kissed him. Then the only possibility was that he was drunk and kissed her. Then she had bitten him, and his tongue still hurt like hell. Furthermore, he vaguely remembered that someone seemed to have touched him last night, and it even caused him to have a reaction. Shen Luowen thought of this and immediately sat up. Just then the door opened. Chapter 2029. Shen Manting. Shen Luowen looked at her and suddenly called out. Shen Manting ignored him. She turned on the switch of the small cabinet and put down the small curtain that blocked out the radiation. "I'm calling you. Didn't you hear me?" "Yes." Shen Manting turned around and put away the diapers. "What do you want?" "Come here." "Why?" "Because you took advantage of me last night." Shen Luowen stood up and walked over to her. "I remember I was wearing a lot of clothes last night. When I woke up this morning, I didn't even have my underwear. Did you take advantage of me?" Shen Manting immediately glanced at him with a look of disgust. "Can you be more shameless? I waited on you for a long time last night. You didn't get up from the bathtub and even rubbed the shower gel on your head. Don't you remember that?" Shen Luowen immediately frowned. How could such a thing happen? Impossible. He couldn't have done such a thing. It was impossible. Shen Manting twitched the corner of her mouth and turned away. "Then why didn't I wear any clothes? I was kind. I helped you take a bath and took off your dirty clothes. My underwear is gone too. Do you like wearing underwear when you take a bath?" Shen Manting looked at him strangely. You have to be content. I haven't even questioned you yet. Are you trying to settle the score after drinking? Shen Luoan looked at her and frowned even deeper. He said seriously, I think you're wronging me. Shen Manting was speechless. She ignored him and turned to leave. Shen Luoan looked at her and felt bored. His head was throbbing with pain, so he turned around and lay down. He slept all the way until the afternoon. The baby was not on the small bed. Shen Luoan yawned. He was undoubtedly in a much better state. After washing up, he walked out and found Nanny He watching TV with the baby in her arms. Shen Luoan frowned. Where is she? She went to take a nap. She didn't sleep much last night. Look at her. The dark circles under her eyes are comparable to those of a panda. She's not in the room. Where did she sleep? In her room, of course. Where is the nanny's room? Nanny He pointed in that direction and said, You're the one who's making a scene when you're drunk. It's not easy for Miss to come back. If you drive her away again, let's see how you're going to lure her back. Shen Luoan didn't say anything, but he was obviously unhappy. It's not like there's no bed for her to sleep in. Who is she trying to impress by sleeping in the nanny's room? When Nanny He heard this, she shook her head and clicked her tongue. Didn't she agree to come back because you treated her as a nanny? Isn't it only right for her to sleep in the nanny's room now? She took care of you and the baby last night. It's time for her to rest. Is the nanny's room good to sleep in? It's hard to sleep. It's humid and stuffy. Auntie Zhang complained about it before. It's really uncomfortable. Nanny He raised her eyelids and glanced at him. But we don't have any extra rooms in the house now. She converted young Mrs. Room into a small storage unit for the baby. She even wants to convert it into a nursery. She's adding some things on the side. She said that when the baby turns 1, she'll quit her job as a nanny and find another way to make a living. Did she really say that? Shen Luoan was furious. How did I mistreat her? Chapter 20:30. Bang! The chair next to him fell to the ground. The baby was so scared that he twitched. Then, he started to cry with a red face. Nanny He was also shocked by the sudden movement. She opened her eyes and peeked at Shen Luoan's expression. Shen Luoan's expression was very ugly. He glanced at the crying baby and went back to the room with a sullen face. What? Sign a contract? Shen Manting was shocked. What contract? Do you even need to ask? Shen Luoan slapped the paper lazily and said impatiently, It's such a big labor contract. Can't you see it? Shen Manting slapped the paper hard and took the labor contract. She muttered, Is it necessary? You make it sound so serious. Shen Luoan heard her muttering and said, You spoil her. Her temper is getting worse. Shen Manting didn't say anything. She looked at the contract and said, You're giving me a salary of 20,000 yuan? How can a nanny get such a high salary? I like you. I'm willing to give you a higher salary. Shen Luoan glanced at her with a natural expression. Shen Manting's heartbeat quickened when she heard his words. She felt a little uncomfortable and lowered her head to continue reading the contract. 10 years? Shen Manting frowned. No way. Why? Shen Luoan was a little dissatisfied. Are you not satisfied with the salary? Shen Manting frowned. If I work here for 10 years, how can I find a partner? I'm only 28 years old and I still have to find a partner. Do you want me to find one around here? Don't pretend to be young. Shen Luoan felt a burst of irritation and corrected her. You're already 29 years old and you've already given birth to a child. You still want to find a partner? Don't you have any shame? Shen Manting laughed when she heard this. Can't I find a partner after I've given birth? Is there any law? You call this shameless? There are plenty of people selling their bodies on the streets. You want to compare yourself to them? Shen Luoan's eyes were full of contempt. How can you compare? At least they have a good figure and look. Go and look in the mirror. Look at yourself. How can you compare yourself? Shen Manting was even more furious. She flipped the contract over and said, I'm just a normal human being. I have normal needs. I'm different from you. I can live the rest of my life alone. I won't sign this contract. Shen Luoan's face darkened. He looked at the contract that had been swept to the ground and said, Your temper is getting worse. Who would have a good temper when facing your face all day long? Am I not good looking? Heh. Don't you have any idea if it's good or not? Shen Luo'an's expression darkened. He stood up and reached out to grab her hand. What do you want? I'll satisfy you. Shen Manting's heart skipped a beat when she felt his tug. Let go of me. However, Shen Luo'an refused to let go of her. Instead, he reached out and wrapped his arms around her waist. Whether it's material, psychological, or physical, I can satisfy you. Shen Luo'an's eyes darkened. It seemed to be enshrouded in a layer of unknown emotions, looking at her quietly and deeply. Shen Manting felt her heart tremble, and her face darkened. Let go of me. Shen Manting, I'm good enough for you. You have to be grateful. Shen Manting was so angry that she laughed. She cursed. F*CKU. You're shameless. Get lost. I don't want to stay here anymore. Chapter 2031. Shen Manting suddenly stopped struggling. She gasped and looked at him. Shen Luo'an didn't let go. He looked at her without saying anything. After a long time, Shen Manting said, You can't satisfy me, Shen Luo'an. What do you mean? Shen Luo'an narrowed his eyes and moved his palm up along her waistline. Slowly, slowly. The strange feeling made Shen Manting tremble. Her body was slightly stiff. Shen Luo'an could clearly feel his palm rubbing her second forbidden area. Like this? Shen Manting felt conflicted. She closed her eyes and turned her head away, trying to push him away. But Shen Luo'an didn't let her go. Instead, he picked her up. Shen Manting screamed. In the blink of an eye, she was pressed on the bed. The familiar and strange feeling made Shen Manting panic. She screamed, Shen Luo'an, let me go. He struggled with all his might with his hands and legs, as if he had used up all his strength. His eyes were slightly red, and he was hysterical. She was afraid. When he realized this, Shen Luo'an immediately let go of her. Shen Manting immediately scrambled out of bed and staggered down the stairs. Looking at Shen Luo'an, her eyes were red and she was short of breath. But soon, she opened the door and ran out. Shen Luo'an turned over and looked at the door. He suddenly felt a deep sense of frustration. Then, he couldn't contain his anger. He picked up the contract and quickly tore it into pieces. Then, he threw it into the trash can. The shredded paper hit the edge of the trash can and fell to the ground. Mrs. Shen was holding the baby outside. When she heard what sounded like an argument inside, her heart tightened with anxiety. After a while, she saw Shen Manting running out in a panic. It didn't look right. Manting. However, Shen Manting didn't stop and quickly rushed out of the door. Mrs. Shen was slightly shocked. When she was about to enter the door, the baby suddenly cried as if he had a premonition. She opened the door and walked in while coaxing the baby. At a glance, she saw that Shen Luo'an's face was dark to the extreme. What's wrong? Mrs. Shen walked in and was a little worried. Did you quarrel with Manting? Shen Luo'an saw his mother and sighed heavily. He sat on the bed and held his head in his hands, feeling hopeless and helpless. He sighed. Mom, what do I have to do to make her stay? Mrs. Shen sighed softly when she heard this. The baby in his arms cried uneasily. Shen Luo'an, who was lying on the bed, became more and more agitated. He reached out for the baby and said, Give it to me. Madam Shen refused to give it to him. She turned around and said, The child is crying because of you. Please don't hit the child. When did I ever hit a child? Shen Luo'an was even more agitated. My temper isn't that bad. Is it? Mrs. Shen laughed when she heard this. Look at your temper. Who in the family can have a worse temper than you? Grandma has quite a temper. Grandma is used to being free and unfettered all her life. Of course she has a temper. Manting's temper is worse. That's because you forced me to do it. Do you think I don't know about your bad temper and unforgiving mouth? Mrs. Shen held the infant in her arms and looked at him with a reproachful expression. Didn't you just ask me what I can do to make her stay? She couldn't leave, so she naturally stayed. Shen Luo'an. Wasn't he just spouting nonsense? Chapter 2032. Just this question alone was enough to put him in a difficult position. Shen Luoan scratched his head in frustration before standing up and asking, "Where did she go?" Mrs. Shen glanced at him and snorted. "He ran out a long time ago. Do you think you can find him now?" Upon hearing this, Shen Luoan immediately picked up his cell phone and dialed Shen Manting's number. Soon, Shen Manting's cell phone rang from inside the room. The ringtone was pleasing to the ear, but it made Shen Luoan even more agitated. Shen Luoan tossed his phone aside and stormed out in a huff. When he opened the door, it was pitch black outside. Only the streetlights were dimly lit. It was already late at night. Shen Manting was still wearing simple and comfortable home clothes. She didn't bring her cell phone, let alone money or identification card. It was already so late, and she had nothing on her. Where could she go? Shen Luoan furrowed his brows and rushed out, shouting, "Shen Manting!" At this time, she shouldn't have gone far. Shen Luoan heard the sound of insects in the yard. He ran out, looked around, and finally ran to the left. But after running back and forth for a long time, he still couldn't find her. Shen Luoan felt a little defeated. He stopped and stood by the side of the road, panting. His mind spun quickly as he carefully recalled the places she might have been to, or the route she might have taken when she was in a bad mood. After thinking for a long time, Shen Luoan located 3 locations. First, a bar. However, she didn't have any money right now, so it was impossible for her to go to such a place to have fun. The second was to go to a friend's house. She did not have many friends. One of them was her former classmate, and the other was a famous socialite in the capital. It was impossible for her to be a socialite. It was very likely that she would go to her classmate's house. However, she didn't even have a phone on her, so she could only put this possibility aside for now. The last possibility was, she was still nearby. She hadn't gone far. Shen Manting was a fake artistic youth. When she was in a bad mood, she would probably play on the swing. Shen Luoan was confused by his sudden thought. Inexplicably, he thought of the swing in the park, the place where children often climbed up and down. Not to mention adults, even children wouldn't have enough to play with. For some reason, Shen Luoan walked in the direction of the park. Under the dim streetlights, the swing in the park was empty. There was no one there at all. Shen Luoan suddenly felt that he was a little funny, but at the same time, he was greatly disappointed. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, he suddenly caught a glimpse of a shadow on the basketball court in the distance. Xiao Xiao shrank under the backboard, her back to the lights, casting a long shadow. Shen Luoan was slightly short-sighted, so he didn't see who it was. However, he still subconsciously lightened his footsteps and walked over. Shen Manting leaned against the pillar under the backboard. The cold touch made her feel even more at a loss. Inexplicably, he felt a little sad. Tears streamed down her cheeks uncontrollably, and she felt extremely aggrieved. He buried his face between his legs and whimpered softly. However, he suddenly heard faint footsteps behind him. She looked back and saw that it was Shen Luoan. Shen Manting was startled. She immediately got up and bounced back subconsciously. Seeing this, Shen Luoan stopped and said, "Let's talk." The conflict in her heart grew deeper and deeper. Chapter 2033. Shen Luoan felt a pang in his heart when he saw Shen Manting retreating. Just like before, she seemed to be afraid of him. If you don't want to sign it, then don't sign it. Let's go back and have a good talk. Shen Luoan looked at her and spoke very slowly. It was as if he was careful with every word he said. Shen Manting stared at him from afar and didn't say anything. Shen Luoan felt even more hurt. He looked at her from afar and said softly, "I know that sometimes my mouth is a little bad, but actually, you're still very good-looking." Shen Luoan felt a little ashamed to say this. A feeling he had never felt before surrounded him. He quietly took a step closer and said, "It's true. Both your face and your figure are better than before. The reason why I said that was because I didn't want you to be compared to those people." Shen Manting was moved by his words, but the tears in her eyes couldn't help but flow down. How could she not know? This guy had always been like this. But she couldn't stand it anymore. It was not only because of his unparalleled bad mouth, but also because of the indelible things he had done to her. "Manting, go back first. Mom is taking care of the baby now. Mom has to go back to the hospital tomorrow. Think about it, If she's not in a good mood during the operation, how guilty would it be? Shen Luoan slowly approached her. Shen Luoan, Shin Manting looked at him with a pair of clear eyes with a pair of desolate light. Do you know that I've always hated you? Shen Luoan was stunned and didn't say anything. I used to think that you were a big brother that I could rely on, a big tree that could shelter me from the wind and rain, Shin Manting said in a choked voice. But I never thought that I would have a relationship with you. I thought that I would be able to endure it, but who knew that you would become even worse? Shen Luoan was slightly shocked and looked at her in disbelief. When you said that you would marry me to O Ming, I was so happy. I thought, I can finally leave you. I don't have to be this incestuous person anymore. God knows how scared I was when I faced my parents and grandma every day, when they treated me like a daughter or a granddaughter. I'm afraid that they'll call me a slut. They brought me back and treated me like their daughter and descendant, but I've become a slut who seduced the man they're so proud of. Do you know how it feels? I live in guilt every day. At that time, Yi Yuyu was still at home. I called her sister-in-law over and over again, but did she know that her husband was in my bed every night? Shen Manting was on the verge of a breakdown. She clutched her chest and said, I've had enough. I've finally escaped. I thought that by giving birth to the baby, I could threaten you and force you to give me a sum of money so that I could run away. As she spoke, she swallowed a mouthful of saliva and stared at him fixedly. But I can't do it. I can't bear to part with the baby. I can't bear to use him as a bargaining chip for my freedom. But I'm not willing to be imprisoned by you and raped by you. Raping her. Such a blatant word was exposed right in front of his eyes. For a moment, Shen Luoan couldn't accept it. Shen Manting's voice trembled as she sobbed. Her thin body was like a piece of cardboard, and she was on the verge of collapsing. Chapter 2034. In your eyes, I'm nothing more than a sex slave. Shen Manting looked at him with tears streaming down her face. You've always loved Yi Yuyu, but you hated Yi Yuyu for so many years because of Guan Kui. I feel so sad for you. Shen Luo unclenched his fists and glared at Shen Manting. He gritted his teeth and said, Shen Manting. Shen Manting chuckled and reached out to wipe her tears. Why? You want to hit me? Shen Luoan walked quickly towards her. Her expression changed, and she immediately said, Shen Luoan, what do you want? However, Shen Luoan remained silent. Shen Manting's heart was filled with panic. What did he want to do? Her body reacted faster than her anger. She turned around and ran. The park was huge, and Shen Manting stumbled as she walked. Stop. He didn't expect her to have such a big reaction. I won't hit you. Stop. But Shen Manting wouldn't stop. Her footsteps quickened, and her body leaned forward slightly as she ran. Shen Luoan was very distressed. Shen Manting ran very fast. His figure was light and agile, and he disappeared into the bushes in a few steps. Shen Luoan felt a headache coming on and shouted, Wait a minute. I'll agree to anything you say. Manting, I never thought that you would have such thoughts. Wait a minute. Shen Manting could clearly hear the voice behind her, and her heart trembled slightly. But his footsteps did not stop. Soon, he was out of the road. After running for some time, she suddenly heard Shen Luoan's voice shouting, Get out of the way! Paw the sound of a long car horn. Shen Manting paused and turned to look at him. The glaring light immediately burned her eyes to the point of pain. He subconsciously narrowed his eyes. When the sports car crashed into her, Shen Manting had a thought in her mind. It's time to put an end to this. Shen Luoan clearly saw the car crash. His pupils shrank and he shouted, Shen Manting! A voice that was on the verge of collapse came from not far away. Shen Manting heard a crisp sound coming from her body. In an instant, a tearing pain spread throughout her entire body. So painful. Was he finally going to die? Mrs. Shen finally managed to coax the baby to sleep. Just as she walked out of the door, she suddenly heard the baby crying loudly. This kind of crying came too suddenly, and Shen Furen was caught off guard and jumped in fright. She hurriedly went forward and picked up the baby. Her heart ached for him as she gently coaxed him. However, the baby's cry this time was different. His little face was flushed red, and his little fists were waving in the air. No matter how she coaxed, hugged, or fed him, he couldn't stop. Mrs. Shen was so anxious that she was about to cry. This was the first time she had sat on the sofa with a baby in her arms, feeling lost. Why aren't they back yet? Mrs. Shen stomped her feet in anger. She picked up her phone and dialed Shen Luo, Anne's number. It rang for a long time, but no one picked up. Finally, when it was about to automatically hang up, someone picked up. Hello? Luoan. Mom. Shen Luoan's voice trembled, and it was obvious that he was choking. Mrs. Shen tensed up. What's wrong? However, before Shen Luoan could say anything, he heard a trembling wail. Mrs. Shen was frightened and immediately panicked. She shouted, What's wrong? What's wrong? Chapter 2035. What's wrong? Mrs. Shen had a bad feeling about this. She had watched Shen Luoan grow up, but she had never seen him like this. You have to tell me what's wrong, Mrs. Shen said sternly. Otherwise, I'll track your cell phone signal to find you. It's nothing. Don't ask. Rest early. Shen Luoan hung up the phone. The more Mrs. Shen thought about it, the more she felt that something was wrong. But the baby cried harder and harder, and Mrs. Shen was confused. She quickly picked him up and comforted him slowly. But the feeling of being kept in the dark was very uncomfortable. Shen Manting was seriously injured. Her left arm was fractured in 3 places, and her right leg was severely abraded. Her cheeks were also blood-stained, and the deep and shallow marks were shocking. The most serious injury was on her head. Her head was severely injured, and there was bleeding in many places. Her life was in danger. Shen Luoan almost couldn't stand when he heard the diagnosis. His hands trembled as he looked at the surgical consent letter. After signing it, he couldn't help but sit on the chair in front of the emergency room. He grabbed his hair with his blood-stained hands and cried in despair and grief. I'm sorry. A man in his 30s or 40s stood beside him and sobbed regretfully. I'm sorry, Luoan. I drank a little, and I thought there would be no one around. Shen Luoan had already lost his strength, but at this moment, he suddenly stood up when he heard this. He stared at him with bloodshot eyes and punched him hard in the face. Zhou Xinghui was in pain and took a step back. Luoan. Ah. Shen Luoan strode forward and kicked him hard on the body. Zhou Xinghui was kicked to the ground. Before he could react, Shen Luoan had already straddled him, and his fists were like hail, falling heavily. Why did you drink? Why did you drive? Why didn't you look at the road? Zhou Xinghui didn't fight back, nor did he resist. After a while, his face was covered in blood. There were many people in the corridor of the emergency room, and the passing nurses exclaimed, That's enough. Someone, pull them away. Why, Zhou Xinghui? What do I owe you? You hurt my woman like this. It was as if Shen Luoan had completely lost his mind. He attacked mercilessly. When he was pulled away, Zhou Xinghui had already fainted. The blood on his face was mixed with tears, and his face was filled with guilt. Shen Longyue was suddenly informed by the hospital staff that Shen Manting was in trouble. He rushed to the hospital in a hurry. However, she did not expect to receive news that Shen Luoan had seriously injured someone and rendered them unconscious. She rushed to the emergency room and saw Shen Luoan sitting at the door from afar. His face was expressionless as he sat at the door, as if he had lost his soul. His home clothes were stained with blood, and he was wearing slippers. Shen Longyue's heart sank. Luoan. Shen Luoan tilted his head slightly. His gray eyes were deathly still. When he saw his father, his eyes trembled and he called out, Dad! What's wrong with Manting? When Shen Luoan was asked this question, he suddenly felt as if his sore spot had been poked. He couldn't help but feel guilty and remorseful, and his eyes reddened. Shen Luoan had always been calm. Ever since he became sensible, she had never seen him like this. Chapter 2036. Shen Longyue's heart sank when the nurse told him about Shen Manting's condition. The nurse saw his gloomy expression and asked curiously, Director, is the person inside your room? Shen Longyue glanced at her and sighed softly. My daughter-in-law. The nurse's eyes were full of sympathy and distress when she heard this. She saw the man with tears on his face at the door. There was no doubt that he was the son of the director. She comforted him and left quickly. Shen Longyue sat down beside Shen Luoan and silently sat with him. The father and son sat at the door for 10 hours. Shen Longyue and Shen Luo, and kept their eyes open and staring at the door of the operating room. They didn't even yawn or take a nap. Finally, the door of the operating room opened. The chief surgeon opened the door and was stunned when he saw Shen Longyue. "Director?" Shen Luo, and immediately got up and grabbed the chief surgeon's clothes. "How is the person inside?" Shen Longyue also came over and said, "This is my son, and the woman inside is my daughter-in-law. How is she now?" The chief surgeon was silent for a moment and seemed to be thinking. Then he said, "She's not in good condition. Although she has received a blood transfusion, her injuries are too serious. Her limbs are broken, and she has lost blood in many parts of her brain. The patient has been in a coma for a long time. It's hard to say whether she will wake up or not." Shen Luoan's face instantly turned pale. He clutched his surgical gown tightly and shouted angrily, "What do you mean?" "Luoan!" Shen Longyue pulled him back. "Listen to him first. Little Qin, has she passed the critical period?" Dr. Qin shook his head and said, "Not for the time being. I've given her medicine, and there may be complications within 24 hours. She has to stay in the ICU for observation. If she can survive these 24 hours, she may survive." Shen Luoan was even more furious when he heard this. He roared, "What do you mean by she may survive?" Dr. Qin looked at him and sighed softly. "Her injuries are too serious. If her vital signs can be stabilized, then she may not die." These vague and heartless words were so cruel that Shen Luoan trembled. She glared at him with bloodshot eyes and said, "If she stabilizes, can she wake up?" Dr. Qin was silent for a moment and looked at Shen Longyue. "Director, you know." Shen Longyue's eyes were already red. He supported Shen Luoan and said in a choked voice, "Luoan, go and rest first." Tell me. Shen Luoan could no longer stand. He was half collapsed and half standing. His voice was almost pleading. Stubble had appeared on his originally clean and refined face. His eyes were bloodshot and filled with blood and tears, making him look particularly miserable and ferocious. Dr. Qin couldn't bear it, but he looked at Shen Longyue and said, "Even if he survives, there's a high possibility that he'll become a vegetable." Shen Luoan felt as though he had been struck by lightning. His body stiffened and his mind went blank. There was a high possibility that he would end up in a vegetative state. Shen Luoan collapsed in despair and cried out, "It's impossible. It's impossible." Shen Longyue was heartbroken and desperate. He pulled Shen Luoan and cried in a low voice, "Shen Luoan, stand up." Chapter 2037. Shen Longyue felt a dull pain in his heart. He had high hopes for his son since he was a child. Shen Luoan was also very promising. No matter what he did it well. Shen Luoan never understood what he was thinking about when it came to love. When Guan Kui committed suicide because of him, he didn't shed a single tear. Now, Shen Manting was in trouble, and he was in this state. Shen Longyue suddenly hated Shen Manting. He hated her for not living up to his expectations. He hated her for getting hurt so badly. Looking at his son, Shen Longyue closed his eyes. "Go back first. Your son is still waiting for you to come home." Shen Luoan heard that and whispered, "Yes, my son is still waiting for me." She took Shen Longyue's hand and was about to get up. However, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his head. All of a sudden, his feet slipped, and his whole body fell straight down. Shen Longyue was shocked. "Luoan?" When he checked again, Shen Luoan had already fainted. Shen Luoan was unconscious for a day and a night. The Shen family was in a mess. Shen Jilia and Yi Qianqian had just finished their wedding in Yun Town when they heard the bad news. When the couple hurried back to their home in the capital, they heard the cries of the baby. Mrs. Shen looked haggard. When she saw her son and daughter-in-law return, she couldn't help but cry. "You're finally back." Yi Qianqian's tears fell. She rushed forward and called out, "Mom!" Shen Jilia saw her and didn't say a word. He reached out and took the baby. The baby had obviously cried for a long time. His voice was hoarse, and his face was pink. Coming. Nanny." He quickly came out with a bottle in her hand. When she saw Shen Jilia, she handed it to him. "Feed the baby first." Mrs. Shen sat on the sofa and wailed. She hugged Yi Qianqian and couldn't stop. Yi Qianqian's heart felt like it was being corroded by thousands of ants. She gently patted her back and whispered, "Don't cry. Don't cry, Mom." Although that was what she said, she cried even harder. Shen Jilie didn't say a word. He carried the baby back to his room. His heart was heavy. He called Shen Longyue, and the call was quickly picked up. However, his voice sounded very tired. "Jilie." "Dad." Shen Jilie's expression was solemn. "Is brother awake?" "Not yet." "Where's Sister Manting?" Shen Longyue did not reply. He sighed and said, "Take good care of your mother and the baby. I'll inform you when Manting wakes up. I'll leave the baby with Qianqian. I'll go to the hospital later." "All right." Shen Longyue was exhausted. Not only was he physically tired, but he was also mentally tired. He had never been so tired before. After feeding the baby and coaxing him to sleep, Shen Jilie went to Shen Luo'an's room. After settling him down, he gave Yi Qianqian some instructions before driving to the hospital. When she stepped into the ward, Shen Luo'an happened to wake up. The first thing he asked when he woke up was, "How's Manting?" "Brother father," Shen Jilie said as he walked in. "Sister Manting is fine. She has passed the critical stage and is still under observation." When Shen Luo'an heard this, he immediately lifted the blanket and got out of bed. "I'll go take a look." As soon as he got off the bed, he staggered. Shen Jilie quickly held him up and said, "Be careful." Shen Luo'an's vision was a little blurry. It took him a while to stand up straight. Chapter 2038. Shen Luo'an's physical fitness wasn't particularly strong. He had endured for a long time yesterday and the day before, so he couldn't take it anymore. Shen Jilie held him and sighed softly. "Brother, you have to take care of yourself so that you can take care of Manting." Shen Luo'an opened his eyes and composed himself. "I'll go and take a look." Shen Manting was in the ICU while Shen Luo'an looked in through the glass. His heart ached when he saw her hands and feet tied up. Her head was completely wrapped with only a white bandage that was slightly bleeding. She looked particularly pathetic. His heart felt as if it had been fiercely stabbed, and the pain was almost suffocating. When he came back to his senses, he found that tears had rolled down his face. Shen Luo'an's body twitched and he couldn't bear it anymore. He squatted down and cried bitterly. Shen Jilie had lived to his late 20s and had grown up with Shen Luo'an. He had never seen him like this before. He squatted down silently and stood side by side with him. Shen Jilie gently patted his shoulder and didn't make a sound. Shen Manting slept for half a month. The doctor finally confirmed that she had become a vegetable. The atmosphere in the Shen family was oppressive. 2 years wasn't long, but it wasn't short either. Since Shen Manting was lying in the hospital, Shen Luo'an had devoted himself to the studio. He spent the rest of his time in the studio, except for the 2 hours he spent by Shen Manting's bed with the child. "Daddy!" The child stumbled into Shen Luo'an's arms, holding a cute fluffy toy in his hands. "Daddy, this is a gift from Grandma." Shen Luo'an stood up with his son in his arms and said, "Little bunny, you're so cute." Little Moon grinned and said, "Daddy, come see Mommy." Shen Luo'an's eyes softened and he said, "Okay, Daddy will take you to see Mommy." Little Moon was very obedient. He had just celebrated his 2nd birthday and was very intelligent. His facial features looked more and more like Shen Luo'an, as if they were carved from the same mold. Shen Luo'an drove him to the hospital. It was very quiet. It was a particularly warm winter. The hospital was a little quieter than usual after the new year. He led the little boy to Shen Manting's ward with ease. He lowered his head and said, "What did Daddy teach you? What do you have to do first when you enter the ward?" "Knock on the door." Little Moon held the bunny in his arms, clenched his fists, and knocked on the door twice. He even said, "Knock, knock." Shen Luo'an smirked. Then he pushed the door open and shouted along with Little Moon, "Mom, Little Moon is here to see you." The father and son walked in, but when Shen Luo'an saw the hospital bed, he suddenly felt as if all the blood in his body had flowed backward to his brain. Suddenly, his mind went blank. The sick bed was empty. Suddenly Shen Luo'an roared, "Where is he?" Xiaoyue was startled by her loud voice. Little Moon's mouth twitched, and he took a step back and burst into tears. Shen Luo also realized that he was overreacting. He quickly picked up the child and went outside. He roared, "Where is she? Who is looking after this ward? Where is Shen Manting?" His voice was extremely loud. His voice echoed in the corridor. Soon, a nurse ran over and poked her head in to take a look. There was no one in the ward. Her heart skipped a beat and she asked, "Where is he?" Chapter 2039. The nurse shuddered and immediately said, "I'll go look for her right away." After saying that, she ran away as if she was escaping. Little Moon had stopped crying. He hugged Shen Luoen's neck and asked, "Daddy, where's Mommy?" Shen Luoen couldn't help panicking. His heart was beating extremely fast, and an unbearable despair was currently pressing down on his chest, causing him to almost be unable to breathe. "Daddy, don't cry." Little Moon's soft little palm brushed across Shen Luoen's eyes. Shen Luoen took a deep breath and coaxed him softly. "Little Moon's a good boy. Daddy will take you to Grandpa first." It wasn't far from the hospital director's office. Shen Longyue was shocked to see Shen Luoen's reddened eyes. "What's wrong?" Shen Luoen tried to calm himself down and said, "Daddy, look after the child. Manting is missing." Shen Longyue was shocked. "What? Why would she disappear out of nowhere?" Shen Luoen also had the same question welling up in his heart. However, no one could answer him. "Now, we can only check the surveillance footage to see when Manting left. Daddy, I'll leave this matter to you. I'll go look for her. Even the nurse didn't find her, so she can't have gone far." Shen Longyue knew the gravity of the matter and nodded. "Okay." After receiving his confirmation, Shen Luoen immediately put the child down and ran away. Little Moon was puzzled. He tilted his head and asked, "Grandpa, where did Daddy go?" Shen Longyue picked up the child and said, "Daddy went to look for Mommy." Then, he made a phone call and went to the surveillance room. Shen Luoen ran hurriedly to the ward and corridor next to him. At the same time, there were many doctors and nurses looking for him. A vegetable had disappeared without anyone noticing. This matter was simply absurd to the extreme. Many people hurried around to look for him. Soon, everyone knew what had happened. After checking the surveillance footage, there was no one like Shen Manting who had left. Shen Luoen went from the first floor to the 7th floor but found nothing. Shen Luoen leaned against the wall helplessly. He felt a cold touch on his back. Suddenly someone shouted, "Found her!" Shen Luoen immediately became alert and ran in the direction of the voice. "Who? Found who?" "The vegetative patient in room 139 has been found." Shen Luoen immediately rushed forward and saw a group of people blocking the door of a ward from afar. "Excuse me, excuse me, excuse me." Shen Luoen pushed his way through the crowd. As soon as he entered, he heard a child crying. The child opened his mouth and cried, holding half a bun in his hand. After glancing at Shen Luoen, he turned to look at the corner. In the corner, there was a woman with disheveled hair. His face was pale and his body was thin and weak. She was dressed in a loose hospital gown and was hugging her legs nervously. She raised her eyes and looked at Shen Luoen. That look, that gaze. Clean and pure, like an innocent child. However, Shen Luoen recognized Shen Manting at a glance. After lying in bed for 2 years, Shen Manting was as thin as a stick. But that charm, even if she were dead, he would still recognize it. Unknowingly, droplets of water were already dripping from his eyes. Shen Luoen walked over and called out softly, "Manting!" Chapter 2040. His voice was trembling with obvious fear. Shen Luoen was stunned. He suddenly squatted down and reached out to hold her arm. "What did you say?" "Ah!" Shen Manting's body trembled violently, and tears streamed down her face. She trembled in fear and shouted, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Uncle, let me go. I won't do it again." His voice was filled with regret and unspeakable fear. Shen Luoen felt as if his heart had been bitten by thousands of ants. He stared at her in disbelief, his heart aching. Shen Manting begged and was about to kneel down. "Enough." Shen Luoan bellowed angrily. Then, he pulled her into his arms and held her firmly in his arms. Shen Manting was stunned, and her body trembled uncontrollably. Enough, enough! Shen Luoan's voice was choked with sobs, filled with endless despair. He buried his face in her neck and said in a trembling voice, "It's really enough. Manting, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Shen Manting was stunned and didn't know what to do for a moment. She could clearly feel the warmth of the man in front of her, and the fear and nervousness in her heart immediately dissipated. For some reason, he felt a slight pain in his heart. However, he was still rational. She gently pushed him and shouted, "Uncle!" Shen Luoan let go of her and looked at the blank expression on her face. He got up and said, "Get up. I'll take you home." Go home?" A look of fear flashed across Shen Manting's face. She pushed him away and shouted, "Uncle, don't call me uncle." Shen Luoan's voice was a bit loud. But when he turned around, he saw that Shen Manting was obviously frightened. His heart ached, and his voice softened. "Follow me back to the ward first. Let the doctor examine you." Shen Manting looked around. All the medical equipment was clearly displayed, and many people were wearing hospital gowns. There was also the smell of medicine and disinfectant in the air. Shen Menying suddenly panicked and burst into tears again. "Am I sick again? Is Uncle Dean angry?" Shen Luoan held her hand and slowly stood up. But when she heard this, she couldn't help but burst into tears. He covered his face with one hand and remained silent. Soon, he pushed his way through the crowd and walked out. Shen Manting remained quiet throughout, sobbing as she followed behind Shen Luoan. "Don't cry." Then, he pulled her into his arms with one hand and said, "Be quiet for the examination first. Answer whatever the doctor asks you later. Do you understand?" Shen Manting nodded blankly. She sniffled hard and said, "Got it." Shen Luoan picked up his phone and called Shen Jilia. "Found it." As soon as he hung up the phone, he heard an old man's voice. Shen Manting looked over and saw a gentle and kind-looking man walking over. He was carrying a child who looked to be in his 50s or 60s. When Shen Longyue saw Shen Manting, he was shocked. Then he swallowed hard and said, Good, you're finally awake." It was Shen Yuexiao's first time seeing Shen Manting with her eyes open. He was a little curious, so he struggled to get off the bed and asked, "Mom?" Shen Manting heard his voice and looked around. Then she looked at Shen Luoan in astonishment and said, "You are a woman?" But. Chapter 2041. As soon as she finished speaking, the three people in the room all looked at her. A look of sorrow. A look of curiosity. A look of doubt. Shen Longyue frowned when he heard this. "Luoan, what's going on?" Shen Luoan looked at his father and shook his head blankly. "She doesn't seem to recognize me." Soon, a doctor rushed over. When he saw Shen Longyue, he was stunned and called out, "Director! Director!" Shen Longyue nodded and said, "Give her a checkup." "Yes." The medical staff quickly arrived. "Please take them out." Following his instructions, they quickly left the room. After a series of examinations, the doctors came out. However, when they came out, the doctors had a strange look on their faces. "She seems to have forgotten who she is. What's going on?" Shen Jilia hurried down. He was still wearing a white coat and was panting slightly. "Is Sister Manting awake?" "Yes." Shen Luoan closed his eyes. "That's great. It's good that she's awake. Everything else can be solved." Shen Jilia breathed a sigh of relief. Her brain was severely damaged. It's normal for her to have memory problems. "I'll go in and take a look." The doctor also recognized Shen Jilia, so he nodded and didn't stop him. When Shen Jilia went in, he saw Shen Manting trying to sneak through the window. She had already lifted one foot, but she seemed to have no strength. It was very difficult. Shen Jilia was shocked and shouted, "What are you doing?" Shen Manting trembled violently and turned her head to look. When she saw Shen Jilia running over, she immediately hugged the window railing and shouted, "Ah! No, don't pull me. I don't have money to pay for the medical fees. Just let me jump off the building and die." Shen Jilia was stunned. Without another word, he pulled her down from the chair. Shen Manting's body was as light as a swallow. He could directly pull her up with one hand. Shen Manting's face was sad and she struggled with her hands and feet. When she found that she couldn't move, she actually hugged Shen Jilia's thigh. Shen Jilia was shocked. Before he could react, he heard a loud roar coming from below. Sob, sob, sob. Uncle, I don't have money. Don't check me anymore. I'm an orphan. I don't have money. The orphanage is going to collapse. If Uncle Director knows that I've been checked so many times in the hospital, he'll definitely kill me. Please don't check me anymore. Shen Jilia didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he heard that. When she turned around, Shen Luoan and Shen Longyue had already walked in. Shen Luoan's face darkened when he saw what she was doing. He quickly stepped forward and pulled her away. But Shen Manting seemed to be possessed. She clung to Shen Jilia's thigh tightly and cried out, "Uncle, don't pull me. I don't have money to pay for the medical fees even if you pull me. I'll pay you back when I grow up. Don't go looking for Uncle Director. He'll kill me." When Shen Luoan heard this, his arms trembled even more. He gritted his teeth and shouted, "Shen Manting, stand up, or else I'll make you pay the medical fees yourself." Shen Manting suddenly stopped crying and looked at Shen Luoan. She sobbed and said, "Are you talking to me? Is there anyone else called Shen Manting here besides you?" Shen Manting immediately stood up, but her body was weak and she almost fell down again. Shen Luoan reacted quickly and held her in his arms. Shen Manting was 168 centimeters, and Shen Luoan was 180 centimeters. When she stood up, her forehead was just close to his chin. Chapter 2042. As soon as she said that, Shen Jilia burst into laughter. Shen Luoan's face darkened. He wrapped his arms around her waist, lifted her up, and put her on the hospital bed. He looked at Shen Manting for a while and couldn't help but say, "Because I'm your man." "Ah." Shen Manting looked at him with her eyes wide open. "What?" Shen Jilia quickly pulled Shen Luoan and said, "Brother, don't scare her. Leave it to me. You can go out first." "No." Shen Luoan took a stool and sat down. "You do what you need to do. I'll sit here." "How can we do that?" Shen Jilia frowned, but when he saw the unhappy look on his father's face, he couldn't help but cough softly and curl his lips. "In that case, Dad, please take care of little Moon for a while." Shen Longyue knew the gravity of the situation. He nodded and said, "Little Moon, let's go." Shen Yueshao didn't comply. He looked at Shen Manting with his big black eyes and said, "Mom." Shen Manting finally saw it clearly. She was shocked and exclaimed, "No way. Is she calling me mommy? When did I have such a big son?" Shen Longyue's heart ached when he heard this. He glanced at Shen Manting and sighed. "Let's go, little Moon. Come back to see Mom later." "Okay." Shen Yueshao was reluctant to leave. "Mom, little Moon will come back to see you tomorrow." Shen Manting heard a childish voice. Shen Manting listened to it and found it familiar. She seemed to hear this sentence every day. She felt a dull pain in her heart. Suddenly, she felt as if she had seen a ghost. She looked at the two men in front of her and sat quietly. Shen Luoan picked up his recording pen and turned it on. He said, "From now on, I'll ask you a question and you'll answer it. Tell me everything you know and the truth. Do you understand?" "Okay." Shen Manting looked at Shen Luoan and then at Shen Jilia. She said, "Uncle, will your brother really pay for my medical expenses?" When Shen Jilia heard this, he chuckled. "How did you know he was my brother? You called him brother just now, and you called the grandfather just now Dad. Also, you look a little similar, which means that you are biological brothers, the sons of the grandfather just now." She then rubbed her stomach and said, "I'm so hungry. I'm so hungry that I don't have any strength left in me." Shen Jilia felt relieved. At the very least, his IQ wasn't low. Shen Jilia took a few notes in his notebook and said, "I'll get you something to eat later. Answer the question first." "How old are you?" 12 years old. "A 12-year-old calls me uncle. Do I look that old?" Shen Luoan asked suddenly. Shen Jilia almost burst out laughing. It seemed that Shen Luoan was very bothered by the way she addressed him as uncle. However, he immediately coughed lightly and said, "Brother, please keep quiet. Shen Luo, and immediately fell silent. Shen Manting said, "You look like you're in your 30s. Although you're not particularly old, you're much older than me." Yes, this was the 12-year-old Shen Manting. Shen Jilia made a few notes in the notebook and asked, "Do you remember what you were doing before you passed out?" "Of course I remember." Shen Manting looked a little sad and said without hesitation, "The director asked me to help him buy soy sauce and go back to cook. But when I went back, I tripped and the soy sauce bottle broke. I was beaten by the director's aunt. When I woke up, I was in the hospital." Shen Jilia frowned and looked up. He asked, "Do you remember what your name is?" "He Yunsuan." "How do you write it?" Chapter 2043. Shen Jilia and Shen Luo, and both looked at her. Shen Manting shrank back under their stares and asked in a low voice, "What's wrong?" "Have you always been called this name?" Shen Jilia asked. As he spoke, he looked at Shen Manting's expression and added, "Tell me the truth." Shen Manting frowned when she heard this and said, "This is my name, not Shen Manting. When I was young, I was abandoned on the street. They didn't even give me a birthday card. Later, an old man who picked up garbage sent me to an orphanage." Shen Luo was silent. Shen Jilia nodded and asked, "And then?" "Then the old man said that since he didn't raise me, why did he give birth to me? So, the director gave me this name. He Yunsuan. She gave a child such a name. Why did she allow it to exist?" Shen Luo felt a little pain in his heart. He realized that he knew nothing about her. "Do you know Zhang Meifeng?" Shen Jilia recorded in his notebook and looked up at Shen Manting. "Yes," Shen Manting nodded. "She's my good friend, but the director likes her very much. She's beautiful and sensible." Shen Jilia and Shen Luo looked at each other. They both saw a trace of doubt in each other's eyes. "What's wrong?" Shen Manting looked at them and suddenly looked a little sad. She asked in a low voice, "Did you find the wrong person? Is the person you're looking for actually Meifeng?" "No, we're looking for you." Shen Jilia tapped the back of his hand with the pen and said slowly, "Have you seen me?" "No." "Have you seen him?" "No." "What do you usually like to eat?" Shen Manting exclaimed. When she heard this, she covered her growling stomach and said, "I'm actually not picky. I eat anything." Shen Luo suddenly asked, "Do you eat onions?" "Ah." Shen Manting's face immediately fell. "No." "Do you eat coriander?" "No." Shen Luo smiled lightly. "Then why did you say you eat anything?" Shen Manting was speechless. He asked a few more questions. Shen Manting did not hesitate and readily followed his advice. But when she asked about Shen Manting, there was an obvious look of doubt on her face. "Who is Shen Yuexiao? Who is Shen Luoan? Who is Shen Jilia?" "I don't know anyone." "All right," Shen Jilia said as he put the notebook away. "I have a general understanding of the situation. Now, I have something to tell you. Don't be too shocked." "What?" Shen Manting looked at him curiously with an innocent look on her face. She was completely different from the usual Shen Manting. Shen Jilia paused for a moment, then stood up and said, "Give me a moment." After walking out for a few minutes, he came back with a mirror in his hand. He handed it to Shen Manting and said, "Take a look at yourself." When Shen Manting saw this, she was baffled. He took it and looked at it. He turned pale with fright. "Ah!" Shen Manting flung the mirror away and asked in horror, "Who is this?" This kind of reaction was a little too big. Shen Luo didn't expect this and couldn't sit still. He picked up the mirror and said, "This is Shen Manting. She's my sister-in-law and the mother of my nephew. She's 31 years old and lives in the capital. She's been an orphan since she was young." Chapter 2044. However, as soon as Shen Manting finished speaking, she found that the eyes of the two men in front of her remained unchanged. Shen Manting was shocked and suddenly felt a little like crying. She pursed her lips and burst into tears. "You're lying to me. I haven't aged. This isn't me at all. I'm only 12 years old." Shen Jilia glanced at Shen Luo and sighed softly. "Brother, we can't go on like this." Shen Luo also had a headache and said, You go ahead. Leave it to me. I'm afraid that you can't handle it. She seems to have lost her memory from the age of 12 to 29. It's a whole 17 years. You! Shen Manting had a bad feeling and looked at them. Didn't you say that I was 31 years old? Yes. Shen Jilia looked at her with a little sympathy in his eyes. You had a car accident when you were 29. Your hands and feet were broken, and your head was severely injured. You've been lying in bed for 2 years. What? What? Shen Manting couldn't believe it. You mean I've been in the hospital for 2 years? How much money is that? Shen Jilia was speechless. She turned around and patted Shen Luan on the shoulder. Communicate well and guide her. I'll go ahead. Okay. Shen Luan responded. His eyes calmly fell on Shen Manting. He slowly said, You're the mother of my child. It's my duty to take care of you. What? Shen Manting felt dizzy. I haven't grown up and I'm not married. How could I have a child? Unfortunately you did. Shen Luan walked over and poured her a glass of water. What do you want for dinner? Shen Manting immediately straightened up. So you're my husband. I want to have a big meal. Is that okay? Husband, Shen Luan was caught off guard. The words suddenly rippled in his heart. He looked at her with his amber eyes and said slowly, Yes. Shen Manting suddenly became excited and said, Then husband, I want to have a big meal. The kind that needs to be cut with a knife and fork. Her eyes were dark and bright, pure and clean, with expectation and desire. Shen Luan's heart ached. He handed the water to her and said, Drink some water first. Shen Manting took the water from him and gulped it down. Are we going to have a feast? She asked. Not yet. Shen Manting was disappointed. What? It's all a lie. You made me call you hubby. Give it back to me. He explained, You've just woken up, so your body can't handle it yet. When you're better, I'll take you to whatever you want to eat. Really? Shen Manting looked at him expectantly. You promised. Yes, I will. Shen Luan nodded. I'll ask my family to prepare a nutritious meal for you. Sure. Shen Manting's eyes sparkled. He was secretly delighted. It seemed like it was pretty good. This uncle looked quite handsome, nice, and had a good personality. The most important thing was that she didn't have to be scolded by Uncle Dean, and she didn't have to deal with the people in the orphanage. She rolled her eyes and looked at Shen Luan. Then, hubby. Can I ask you a question? Hubby. It was another word that caught him off guard. Shen Luan straightened up and answered in a low voice. Yes. We've already given birth to a child. Have we kissed? Shen Luan looked at her again, perhaps because such a question was too childish. Chapter 2045. Shen Luan glanced at her a few more times because her question was too childish. Shen Manting shrank back and whispered, I swore that my first kiss would be reserved for my Prince Charming. Her silly and cute words made the soft part of Shen Luan restless for a moment. He moved an inch and leaned toward her. Shen Manting subconsciously shrank back, but in the next moment, Shen Luan had already reached out and clamped her chin, accurately capturing her lips. The soft and smooth touch was immediately transmitted from his lips. Shen Manting's eyes widened, but soon she closed them again. Shen Luan had never felt like this before. It turned out that Shen Manting would be so obedient when he kissed her. He couldn't help but ask for more. He gently pried open her lips and teeth, captured her softness, and slowly invaded. After an unknown period of time, Shen Manting couldn't stand it anymore. She gently pushed him away, and Shen Luan released her. Shen Manting immediately panted, and her cheeks were a little red. She looked at him shyly. Shen Luan was even more confused. He couldn't help but move closer and look at her deeply. Shen Manting shrank back, then lay on the bed and covered her head with the quilt. Her voice came from under the quilt, and it was a little muffled. Honey, I don't want to have children anymore. After she had a big meal, she would consider whether to continue kissing her biological child. However, she was so hungry now. Kissing shouldn't make her pregnant, right? Shen Manting was a little uncertain. She lifted the quilt and revealed one eye. At a glance, she saw Shen Luan standing. Shen Luoan looked at her with a deep gaze. He was a little sad and glad. Shen Manting suddenly felt that he was very pitiful. She whispered, "Honey, are you very sad?" When Shen Luoan heard this, he suddenly smiled and said, "No." "Then why do you look so sad?" Shen Manting looked at him with a little guilt and apology. She whispered, "But I still want to say, don't kiss me in the future. What if I get pregnant? I don't want to have children. I heard that giving birth is very painful. Very painful. It can even kill people." Shen Manting thought of this and shrank back. When Shen Luoan heard this, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Who told you that kissing will make you pregnant?" Ah, Shen Manting's face was burning with embarrassment. She covered her face with the blanket in embarrassment and whispered, "That's what everyone says." Shen Luoan let out a rare laugh. He moved closer and whispered, "I won't, but I'm your Prince Charming. Our child is already 2 years old. You have to call me hubby from now on. Do you understand?" Perhaps it was because Shen Luoan was so close to her that she felt her heart warm up. Her face was also hot. She nodded and said, "Yes, I know, hubby." Shen Luoan's heart softened, and tears welled up in his eyes. He turned around and said, "I'll make the call." Shen Manting looked at his back and suddenly felt a little sad. This feeling came out of nowhere. It was a little scary, but at the same time, there was satisfaction and excitement. This feeling seemed to be instinctive. Even she herself did not know what she was sad about, excited about, or satisfied about. He stayed in the hospital for 3 days. After 3 days, when the doctors confirmed that she was physically and mentally fit to be discharged, Shen Manting returned to the so-called home. It was a beautiful and luxurious house. She had never seen such a big and beautiful house. Mom. Chapter 2046. Shen Manting was a little frightened. It wasn't that she hadn't seen this child in the past few days, but it was still very difficult for her to accept that such a large meatball had actually popped out from her stomach. She looked at him and squatted down. Shen Yuexiao also looked at her. The mother and son looked at each other for a long time. The little fellow stretched out his arms and shouted, "Mommy, hug me." Shen Manting's heart suddenly softened. Her lips unconsciously curled into a smile, and she reached out to hug him. "Manting is back." Nanny He's eyes were slightly red. "I'm glad you're back. I'm glad you're back." Shen Manting blinked her eyes in confusion. Shen Luoan reminded her, "This is Nanny He." "Hello, Nanny He." Shen Manting greeted her obediently and quickly followed Shen Luo and into the room with the infant in her arms. "This is our room." Shen Luoan stood up straight and pointed to a small bed inside. "The baby sleeps there." Shen Manting nodded. "Are we going to sleep here?" As he spoke, he walked over and looked at the big bed. But when she turned around, she saw Shen Luo and slightly strange expression. Shen Manting thought she had said something wrong. She hugged the baby and shrank her head. She whispered, "Aren't Daddy and Mommy supposed to sleep together?" She didn't have parents, but the parents of other children slept in the same room, on the same bed. Shen Luoan's eyes softened. He nodded slightly. "Yes." Shen Manting breathed a sigh of relief. She sat down with the baby in her arms and said, "What a big bed. I've never slept in such a big bed before. Wow, it's so bouncy and comfortable." "Manting, you're back?" An old man's voice rang out. Shen Manting felt a sense of familiarity when she heard it. She put the baby down, stood up, and walked out. When she saw the old woman walking toward her, she greeted, "Grandma." Old Mrs. Shen immediately rushed forward and hugged Shen Manting with reddened eyes. "It's good that you're back. It's good that you're back. You're finally out of the hospital. Let Luo and take you out for a walk." "Yeah." Shen Manting smiled slyly and said, "Hubby said he's taking me out for a feast today." "Hubby." Nanny He couldn't help turning around to take a second look at the way she addressed him. The others had already seen how thorough Shen Manting's amnesia was, so they were not surprised by it. Old Mrs. Shen nodded and said, "All right, go ahead then. Luoan, take good care of Manting." "Okay." Shen Luoan chuckled. "I won't be bringing little Moon along. Just watch." "Okay." Old Mrs. Shen's eyes curved into crescents as she smiled. Manting was finally as obedient as she was now. Of course, He had to create more opportunities for them to be alone together. He took Shen Manting for a stroll around the neighborhood of the house. Everything he saw was new and interesting. She didn't reject Shen Luo, and holding her hand. His palm was soft and warm. She was just too skinny. Let's go. Shen Manting agreed happily and got into his car. Hubby, will it be just the two of us? Yes. Shen Luoan glanced at her, his eyes full of tenderness. This is called a world of the two of us. Shen Manting blushed when she heard that. She asked in a low voice, "Are we going on a date?" Shen Luoan chuckled. He leaned over and said, "Yes, come closer." Chapter 2047. Shen Luoan's heart warmed when he saw her pouting little mouth in front of him. He lowered his head slightly and gently kissed her lips. He gently held her in his arms and felt her obviously too thin body. His heart ached a little. He reached out and pulled the seatbelt behind her. He let go of her and said, "I'll take you to eat your favorite food." Shen Manting's cheeks were red and she was very happy. She nodded and looked at Shen Luoan with a pair of shining eyes. She said sincerely, "Honey, you're so nice. Honey, you're so nice." It was impossible for Shen Manting to utter those words, but she could hear them clearly from the side. Shen Luoan's hands trembled slightly when he buckled her seat belt. If she knew how much she used to hate him, would she still say such words? Would she still say good things about him? Would she still call him husband? There was no doubt about the answer. But soon, it returned to normal. "Let's go." The car drove steadily to the Western restaurant that Shen Manting used to like to go to in the past. He ordered her favorite dishes. Shen Manting looked around curiously, as if she had never seen it before. She leaned forward and whispered, "Honey, is our family very rich?" Shen Luoan chuckled. "Why do you ask? One look and you can tell that this is a very expensive place. I just looked at the menu and it costs more than $500 for a steak. It's so expensive. When I was obedient, Uncle Dean only gave me 10 cents to buy candy." Shen Manting felt a little wronged as she spoke. But soon she covered her mouth and said timidly, "Honey, am I too childish?" Shen Luoan felt a slight pain in his heart and looked at her sadly. He shook his head against his will and said, "No, it's very good." Shen Manting vaguely felt that he was lying. But she didn't expose him. Nodding his head, he quietly sat up straight and still. Soon, the dishes were served. There was only one steak on a very fragrant and high-end plate. Shen Manting opened her eyes wide but didn't say anything. After the waiter left, she said, "Honey, it's even more beautiful than what I saw on TV." Shen Luoan chuckled and picked up the knife and fork. "Come on, I'll teach you how to cut it." "Yes." Shen Manting beamed. She looked at Shen Luoan's expression and demonstrated it to him, and he quickly followed her advice. Just like she knew how to use it. After a hearty meal, Shen Luoan and Shen Manting went shopping. He bought a lot of clothes. Shen Manting was too thin now. After choosing 2 sets of clothes, she tugged at Shen Luoan and said, "Honey, I've just woken up. The smallest one is already too big for me. Don't buy it now. I'll buy it again when I gain some weight." Shen Luoan nodded with a smile. Returning home was a rewarding journey. Shen Yueshao had already fallen asleep. Shen Luoan and Shen Manting crept into the room quietly. "Go take a shower first." "I'll get you your pajamas," Shen Luoan said. "Okay." Shen Manting didn't dare to speak too loudly and quickly walked into the bathroom. However, he was dazzled by the spacious bathroom and exclaimed, "It's too big." Shen Luoan was holding her pajamas. When he heard this, he smiled and asked, "Do you know how to shower?" Shen Manting looked at him as if he was retarded. "Do you think I'm stupid?" She took the pajamas and pushed him out. "Don't peek at me." The smile on Shen Luoan's face widened. He nodded with a smile and said, "I'll wait for you." Shen Manting's face turned red. Chapter 2048. Her heart was beating fast. Shen Manting was in a good mood. She hummed a tune, took off her clothes, and entered the shower room. She turned on the water and tested the temperature before she suddenly realized that something was wrong. When she was in the orphanage, she used to boil water for bathing. Why did she know how to use such an advanced thing here? Shen Manting suddenly felt a little excited and muttered, "It seems that I'm really a genius." While she was happily bathing, she touched her small chest. The bulge seemed so big. She couldn't hold it with one hand. She was so thin, how did it grow? After bathing awkwardly, she found that her body was different everywhere. After a while, Shen Manting put on clean pajamas and walked out. Her wet hair was wrapped up. Shen Luo and didn't know what he was doing. When he saw her come out, he seemed to hide something under the quilt. Shen Manting blushed and shouted, "Honey, what are you doing?" "Nothing." Shen Luoan stood up. "Dry your hair. Don't catch a cold." "I won't." Shen Manting waved her arm. "There's a heater in the room. It's not cold. Sit down." "Okay." Shen Manting sat on the bed and couldn't help but look under the quilt curiously. Shen Luoan noticed her little movement, but he pretended not to see it. He removed the towel from her head and slowly dried her hair. The heater in the room was on, and soon her hair was half dry. Shen Luoan quickly went to take a shower, and Shen Manting immediately reached out to the quilt. She felt a small box. The box was made of black velvet and felt smooth and comfortable. She opened the box, and inside was a ring. It was a big, shiny diamond in the shape of a heart. Shen Manting's eyes lit up. She couldn't help but pick it up and put it on her finger. Almost automatically, she put it on the ring finger of her left hand. There was no flesh on her finger, so it was easy to put on. It was very loose and dangled on her finger. But for some reason, she suddenly felt an unknown place in her heart began to ache. She suddenly felt a little sad. She stared at the ring, and her eyes were a little hot. An urge to cry was difficult to suppress. It came crazily but inexplicably. He quietly put the ring back and continued to stuff it under the blanket, pretending that he had not touched it at all. But when she fell onto the bed, she couldn't help but burst into tears. She whimpered softly, her heart was empty, very empty. When Shen Luoan came out, Shen Manting was already asleep on the bed. The position was in the middle. The lights were still on, very bright. However, she was sleeping soundly. Her even breathing could be heard, almost in sync with her son's. He walked up quietly and subconsciously touched the ring he had just placed on the table. It's still there. He was a little disappointed, but he quickly placed the ring in the drawer of the bedside table. He turned off the lights and lay down. There was a faint sense of satisfaction and joy in his heart. He reached out and gently pulled her into his embrace. Shen Manting was asleep. When she sensed his breath, she couldn't help but lean forward and reach out to grab his clothes. "Honey, I feel so sad." Shen Luoan's body stiffened. He placed his hand on her cheek and asked softly, "What's wrong?" Chapter 2049. Shen Luoan's body stiffened when he heard this. His heart ached and he looked down at her face. The room was dark, but he could still clearly feel the tears on Shen Manting's face. She was different from before. She was different at all. In the past, Shen Manting would cry with a smile. It was ugly and cruel. But now she was crying. She was just crying. She was different. She was different. Shen Luoan silently pulled her into his arms and hugged her tightly. Shen Manting subconsciously leaned over and wrapped her arms around him. She rubbed against his chest. His body smelled faintly of shampoo. It was warm. Shen Luoan gently patted her back and whispered, "Don't think about anything. Go to sleep." "Okay." Shen Manting closed her eyes and soon fell into a deep sleep. Shen Luoan hugged her and his heart ached. He closed his eyes, but his mind was in a mess and he couldn't sleep. Early morning. Shen Manting's body ached from sleeping and she stretched. But when she turned around, she saw Shen Luoan looking at her. His amber eyes were clear and quiet. Shen Manting was startled and her body twitched. Then, she shrank back and her cheeks were a little hot. "Good morning, honey." Shen Luoan smiled and said, "Good morning." Shen Manting immediately got up and went to the bathroom. She closed the door and was in a good mood. After washing up, she walked out and saw Shen Luoan dressing the child. Shen Yueshao saw Shen Manting coming out and called out with a smile, "Mom!" Shen Manting walked over and touched the little boy's head. Good boy. The little boy was a little happy. He opened his arms and rubbed them in Shen Manting's direction. Give me a hug. Shen Manting squatted down and picked up the little boy. Let's go. Mom will take you to dinner. Okay. Shen Yuexiao was very happy and hugged Shen Manting's neck. Shen Luoan smiled with relief when he saw it, but then he reminded her, you haven't brushed your teeth yet. Help little Moon brush his teeth first. Shen Manting was shocked. He's so young and he's already brushing his teeth? Of course you have to brush your teeth. It won't hurt so much when you're changing your teeth. Shen Luoan tapped her nose. You have to instill good education and habits in your child. Oh. Shen Manting held the baby in her arms. Let's go then. Does he know how to do it? Yes. Little Moon had already spoken up. Mommy, I can brush my teeth. Shen Manting couldn't help but exclaim. He's indeed a doctor's child. She carried him into the bathroom and said, let's go. From today onwards, she would learn to be a good mother. Be a good mother. No matter what, she must have given birth to this child. Otherwise, how could he look so much like her? Moreover, he was adorable no matter how she looked at him. She could get a son without having to suffer any pain. It was worth it. But just as this thought flashed through his mind, he heard the child's voice. P. Shen Manting froze and looked at him. Little Moon pouted and said, Mommy, pee. She looked at Shen Luoan and said, Dear, the baby wants to pee. Shen Luoan chuckled when he saw her pleading look. He took the baby from her arms and said, Go and have breakfast first. I'll clean up for your baby. Okay, Shen Manting replied and turned around. She felt sweet inside and said, I'll wait for you. Chapter 2050. When Shen Manting walked out, the whole family was already outside. A young woman was sitting next to Shen Jilia. She looked very lively and beautiful. When she saw Shen Manting, her eyes lit up and she exclaimed, Manting! Shen Manting was a little flattered. She stepped back and said, I'm Yi Qianqian. Yi Qianqian pointed to herself and then to Shen Jilia. Shen Jilia's wife. As she spoke, she hugged Shen Manting excitedly. You're finally awake. That's great. Yi Qianqian's eyes were a little red. She patted her back and said in a choked voice, Everything will be fine. Shen Manting suddenly didn't know how to react. She laughed and said, Sisi, I'm hungry. Oh. Yi Qianqian immediately released her and smiled happily. Well, let's eat together. Yi Qianqian held Shen Manting's hand and walked to the table. Shen Manting looked around and called out, Dad, Mom, Grandma. The people who were called all smiled. Mrs. Shen smiled and said, Don't be so formal at home. Well, eat more. Look at how thin you are. Old Mrs. Shen's heart ached for her. She handed her a bowl and asked, When will your body be as fair and plump as it used to be? Shen Manting glanced at her body. Fair and plump? She had never experienced what it felt like to be fair and plump. So, she had been fair and plump before? Shen Manting sat down and nodded. She was a little touched. When they were halfway through eating, Shen Luoan came out with his son. Little Moon was bouncing up and down. When he saw Shen Manting, he called out, Mom! Shen Manting's eyes softened and she nodded. Shen Luoan carried him to the dining table and sat down. He said, Who else hasn't been called? Grandpa. Grandma. After greeting Grandpa and Grandma in a childish voice, his eyes fell on old Mrs. Shen. He blinked and called out, Grandma. Shen Luoan chuckled and pinched his little face. He corrected, Great-grandma. Take Grandma. He shouted loudly, but it wasn't accurate. Everyone laughed. Old Mrs. Shen smiled and gave him a cup of soy milk. Say it again. Take Grandma. Yi Qianqian couldn't stop laughing and asked, What about me? What about me? Little Moon tilted his head and thought for a moment, but he still didn't know what to say. He looked at Shen Luoan for help. Daddy? Shen Luoan chuckled and greeted, Aunt. Little Moon called out softly, Sensen. Auntie. Yi Qianqian corrected her. Lift your tongue, Auntie. Little Moon looked a little helpless, as if he knew that he had called out the wrong name. He shrunk his head and whispered, "Sensen." Yi Qianqian gave up and gave him a small bun. "Be good." Xiao Yuer took it from her and beamed with joy. Shen Luowen bowed his head and said, "Thank you, Aunt." "Xie Sensen." The whole family couldn't help but laugh. Shen Jilia finally walked over and chuckled helplessly. Calling Mom and Dad is quite smooth, but calling anyone else is no good. "Uncle." Little Moon looked at Shen Jilia excitedly and called out to him. Shen Jilia laughed and said, "You're smart." Little Moon knew that he had been praised and swung his legs happily. "Our Little Moon can talk about other things." Shen Luowen sat beside him and said, "What do you want to say to Mommy?" Little Moon smiled and pointed at Shen Luowen. Then he shouted, "Mommy, Little Moon is here to see you." Chapter 2051. It was a very familiar sentence. It was as if she had heard it countless times when she was asleep. After the young child finished speaking, he laughed happily. He took a bite of the little bun in his hand and smiled happily. She felt a lump in her throat and had the urge to cry. Shen Luowen seemed to notice Shen Manting's gaze and looked at her. His eyes were a little soft, and he looked at her with a smile on his face. After breakfast, Shen Luowen handed the baby to Yi Qianqian. After getting her full assurance, he led Shen Manting out. Shen Manting sat in the driver's seat. This time, she had learned to be smart. She buckled her seatbelt and looked at Shen Luowen. "Honey, where are we going today?" "To the orphanage." Shen Luowen glanced at her. "Back to the orphanage." Shen Manting opened her eyes wide and said, "Are we going to the orphanage?" "Yes." Shen Manting was a little scared after getting a positive answer. She slid her hand on the seatbelt and asked, "Why are we going back?" "To find your good friend." Shen Luowen looked at her. "Do you remember what you told me your name?" Shen Manting felt a little strange when she heard this. After thinking for a while she said, "He Yunsuen." "Was that your name when you were in the orphanage?" Shen Manting nodded and looked at the expression on Shen Luowen's face. She felt a little scared and asked, "What's wrong?" "What about Zhang Meifeng?" "She is my good friend." Shen Manting was very sure. "Honey, you have asked this question twice. The last time was in the ward a few days ago." He and Shen Jilia were asking this question. When it came to this question, both of their expressions didn't look too good. They were indescribably solemn. Could it be that there was a problem? Shen Manting looked at him, but Shen Luowen didn't say anything. He said, "Sit tight." "Okay." Shen Manting was already seated. "I'm ready." Shen Luowen glanced at her, started the car and sped away. By the time they arrived at the orphanage, almost an hour had passed. During this hour, Shen Manting looked out of the window and played with her phone from time to time. He stopped the car and turned off the GPS. "We're here," he said. Shen Manting looked up and exclaimed, "Hubby, why has this place become so run down?" "It's been 19 years. Of course it will change." Shen Luowen unbuckled his seatbelt. "Let's go." When Shen Manting got out of the car, the sun was blazing. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the two children sitting at the door. The two children looked to be only 5 or 6 years old. When they saw Shen Luowen's car, their eyes lit up in surprise. Shen Manting felt a little sour in her heart. Finally, I'm not the one looking at other people's cars. Now these children are also looking at my car. Humph. She caught up with him, held his arm and asked, "Hubby, is the director still around?" Shen Luowen asked. "Is the director still around?" "Yes." Shen Luowen glanced at her. "Do you remember which room it was?" Shen Manting nodded and pulled Shen Luowen into the yard. The children were running around and playing games. Seeing these two strangers dressed so well, they couldn't help but take a few more glances. "Director!" Shen Manting shouted. "Is the director around?" Chapter 2052. Are you the dean? Shen Manting looked at the man in front of her, who was about the same age as Shen Luowen, and was surprised. The man looked at her and said, "The dean is resting at the moment. Why are you looking for him?" Shen Manting breathed a sigh of relief and said, "I used to live here and now I'm back to look for him." "Oh." The man looked at Shen Manting and said, Who are you? Why do you look so familiar? However, he was too thin. He looked so thin that he was out of shape. She couldn't recognize him at all. When Shen Manting heard this, she smiled and said, "Do you know me? I'm He Yunsuan." The man looked at her in surprise and said, "Yunsuan? Really? Why are you? Why is he so thin?" "Yes." Shen Manting looked as usual, then glanced at Shin Luoan, took his arm and said, "This is my husband, Shin Luoan. He's a scientist." The man was even more surprised. "A scientist?" "No," Shin Luoan pressed Shin Manting's hand. "I'm just researching some medicine. Is the old dean here?" "Oh, he's sleeping. The old man hasn't been in good health recently." The man kept glancing at Shen Manting as he spoke and said, "Yunsuan has become so big. Time flies. Do you still remember who I am?" "Who?" Shen Manting looked at him with her eyes wide open and frowned. She vaguely felt that he was a little familiar, but the difference from when he was a child was too big. Shen Manting couldn't recognize who he was at all. The man laughed and said, "Don't you remember me? I'm He Junxing." "He Junxing?" Shen Manting covered her mouth. "No way, how is it possible?" He Junxing touched his head with a little embarrassment. "Yes, I've changed a little. Come on in and sit down." Shen Manting's face was still full of disbelief when she led the two in. "Isn't He Junxing the silly little brother from before? You look so smart now." Shen Manting's memory stopped at the age of 12, so she didn't have many words in her mind. What he said at this moment was the truth of the heavens. He Junxing felt even more embarrassed and said, Yes." Shen Luoan's lips curved into a smile. He pressed Shen Manting down and said, "She got into a car accident 2 years ago and was hospitalized for 2 years. She has some memory problems and can only remember things from before she was 12 years old." He Junxing was stunned for a moment. Then he looked at Shen Manting with understanding in his eyes. He looked at her sympathetically and said, "Yunsuan is a very smart person. The headmaster likes him very much. I'll go see if the headmaster has woken up." "Wait a minute." Shen Luoan stopped him. "Since you grew up with her, you should know a lot about her. Let's talk first." He Junxing looked at Shen Manting and nodded. "Have a seat. I'll make you some tea." Shen Luoan was indeed a little thirsty, so he didn't refuse. Shen Manting made herself at home and pulled Shen Luoan to sit on the bone stool. The decoration of the house was very old, and the furniture seemed to be from more than 10 years ago. Shen Manting looked around and suddenly stood up. She said, "Hubby, Mei Fong and I drew a butterfly here. Come and take a look." Shen Luoan stood up and walked over. Sure enough, he saw the shallow marks. There were 2 butterflies, one crooked and the other dancing. There was a signature at the bottom, and it was written Zhang Mei Fong at the bottom. On the butterfly that looked slightly better, it was written He Yunsuan. There was also a smiling face at the bottom. The marks were very shallow, and it was obvious that a long time had passed. The orphanage was not big, and the decoration was very old. Shen Luoan looked around and saw that He Junxing had already brought the tea set. Shen Luoan pulled Shen Manting back to sit down. He Junxing smiled and said, "It's been a long time since we had a guest." The tea set was left for a while, and it was just washed. After boiling the water, He Junxing looked at Shen Manting and said, "She just woke up, didn't she? She's too thin." "Yes, she woke up a few days ago." Shen Luoan looked at him. "But, are you sure she's He Yunsuan?" "Yes." He Junxing looked at her. "She's witty and clever. She's obviously powerful. Who else could it be if not Yunsuan?" "Then, what about Zhang Mei Fong?" Shen Luoan asked. At the mention of this name, He Junxing was quite emotional. Mei Fong is quiet and seems to be quiet. She's not very smart. Compared to Yunsuan, she's far behind. Where is she? She disappeared when she was a teenager. I don't know where she went. At that time, I called the police and looked for the surveillance cameras, but they couldn't find her anywhere. He Junxing disinfected the tea set when the water was boiling. "It's a pity. Mei Fong is kind and good-looking. Back then, my grandmother came to adopt her." Shen Luoan looked at him. At that time, she found someone based on her horoscope, and the person she adopted was Zhang Mei Fong. He Junxing's teacup trembled, and the cup fell. The boiling water splashed and sprayed Shen Manting's fingers. Shen Manting shrank her hand in pain and hurriedly covered it. Shen Luoan was shocked. He pulled her hand over and quickly checked it. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." Shen Manting was a little embarrassed. She pushed his hand away and looked at He Junxing. "Junxing, can't you find Mei Fong now?" He Junxing suddenly looked a little flustered and said, "Who's here?" A slightly old voice was heard. An old man who looked to be in his 50s or 60s walked over. Shen Manting recognized him at a glance. "Uncle Dean." She stood up and walked over to him to help him. When Uncle Dean saw Shen Manting, he was stunned. "You are Yunsuan." Shen Manting said her name without any hesitation. The moment she said it, the look on the dean's face changed a little. He subconsciously glanced at Shen Luoan and asked, "Who is this?" "My husband." Shen Manting smiled and helped the old man to sit down beside the chair. "Long time no see." "Yes, long time no see." The dean smiled, but he looked a little uncomfortable. "I haven't been here for a long time." "You're here for?" "Dean, I want to know where Zhang Meifeng is." The dean's expression changed. "Zhang Meifeng." He Junxing looked at him and frowned. "Dean, it's okay." "Meifeng." Meifeng was adopted. The dean felt a little guilty. "She hasn't been back for many years." "Didn't she get lost?" Shen Luoan asked. "Mister, he just said that Zhang Meifeng got lost when she was a teenager. Moreover, you said that she was adopted. When she became an adult, she was adopted by our family again. What's going on?" The person they wanted to adopt was Zhang Meifeng. Chapter 2053. The person they wanted to adopt was Zhang Meifeng. In the end, they adopted He Yunsuan instead. Grandma would never lie to her family, so there was only one explanation. Grandma had been deceived. According to He Junxing, Zhang Meifeng had long been lost. In the end, when Grandma went to look for her, the orphanage replaced Zhang Meifeng with He Yunsuan. Why did they do that? The director was sweating profusely when he heard this. He panicked and said, "You are?" "My name is Shen Luoan." Shen Luo, and took out his business card. The director held the white business card in his hand and couldn't help but feel nervous. "My grandmother adopted a girl named Zhang Meifeng from this orphanage." As Shen Luoan spoke, he paid close attention to the director's expression. "My grandmother firmly believed that she was my missing sister, who had been missing for more than 10 years. When she came to look for her, she brought along her birth date. Later, when she did a paternity test, she discovered that she had nothing to do with our family." The director looked up at him and said, "Maybe it was a mistake." "Yes, we thought so too," Shen Luoan said slowly. "But this time, Manting got into a car accident and was bedridden for 2 years. When she woke up, she only remembered things before she was 12 years old and believed that her name was He Yunsuan. Then, what about Zhang Meifeng?" The more the director listened, the more nervous he became. He Junxing looked at the director and sighed softly. "Uncle Director, I just told him that Meifeng went missing when she was 14 years old." The director looked at He Junxing in disbelief. "You?" He Junxing lowered his head guiltily. "I forgot about that for a moment. I'm sorry." "Sigh." The director put down the business card and looked sad. "Mr. Shen, I'm sorry. What do you mean?" When she was ready to adopt Meifeng, she had already gone missing. At that time, she used Meifeng's date of birth to look for her. The director looked sad. At that time, the orphanage was poor. She said that if she could find her granddaughter, she would give us 100,000 yuan as a token of appreciation. "So you lied to my grandmother?" Shen Luoan frowned slightly. "Does the date of birth that my grandmother provided match Meifeng's?" The president nodded. "That's right. At that time, I was muddle-headed. I wanted the $100,000, and I wanted Yun Cun to live a good life. So I asked Yun Cun to pretend to be Meifeng and go to your house." As he spoke, he looked at Shen Manting. Shen Manting's eyes were already brimming with tears. "What about Meifeng?" "I don't know." The director shook his head. "She was a young girl at that time. It's normal for her to be kidnapped and sold. After returning from the orphanage, Shen Manting was in low spirits. On his way here, he looked left and right. But when Shen Manting returned, she was speechless. She looked at Shen Luo An and asked, "Honey, is it possible that Mei Fong is your biological sister?" Shen Luo An glanced at Shen Manting and nodded. "Yes. Does that mean I can't be called Shen Manting anymore?" Shen Manting looked at Shen Luo An and said, "The real Shen Manting is Mei Fong, and I'm a fake. It's just like what they say on TV. We were replaced by a leopard cat. I'm the leopard cat, and Mei Fong is the crown prince." Chapter 2054. I'm not Shen Manting either. Shen Manting was a little disappointed. "I'm used to it. You all call me Manting, but Manting is gone. Can I still be Manting?" Shen Luoan sighed softly and glanced at her sideways. He held the steering wheel with one hand and held her hand with the other. Looking at the road ahead, he said slowly, "What are you talking about? No matter who you used to be, or who the real Shen Manting is, you are you now. You are Shen Manting. I'm just here to take a look because I'm a genius. Honey, will you still be my husband in the future?" Shen Manting looked at him with a pair of big eyes full of doubt and expectation. Shen Luoan's heart fluttered when he suddenly heard this. He turned his head and looked into her dark and clear eyes. He felt a little choked. After a long time, he said softly, "As long as you want, we will always be husband and wife." Shen Manting's originally gloomy mood suddenly became joyful. With a smile on her face, she lowered her head and played with the hem of her dress. She said happily, "Of course I want to. We will always be husband and wife." Shen Luoan looked at her deeply and looked away. There was a dull pain in his chest, and his hands trembled slightly. Looking at the bright sky ahead, he said tentatively and pleadingly, "Then let's go to the Civil Affairs Bureau tomorrow." "Ha!" Shen Manting didn't hear clearly. "Honey, what did you say?" Looking at her clear and innocent eyes, Shen Luoan's courage suddenly shrank. His throat was a little dry and he said, "Nothing." It was already afternoon when they returned to the city. Shen Manting was hungry, so he took her out for dinner. It was already 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon when they returned home. Because Shen Manting woke up, Shen Luoan hadn't been to the laboratory for several days. Old Fifth made one call after another. In the end, Shen Luoan couldn't win against Lao Wu. He had to leave Shen Manting at home and go out. Before going out, Shen Manting seemed to be a little flustered and called out, "Honey." "Ha!" Shen Luoan turned around. "What's wrong? When will you be back?" "At night." Shen Luoan rubbed her little head and said softly, "I'll try to come back as soon as possible." "Oh." Shen Manting looked a little disappointed. "Can't you bring me along? Be good and stay at home. It'll be fine." Shen Luoan looked a little helpless. "You can spend some time with your son. You're his mother. You need to nurture your relationship with him." "All right." Shen Manting finally felt a little relieved. She tugged at his clothes reluctantly and said, "Then, come back soon." "Okay." Shen Luoan let go of her hand and turned around. But before he could take 2 steps, he heard another shout from behind, "Hubby!" He turned around and saw Shen Manting running towards him with a flushed face. Shen Manting stood on her tiptoes and kissed him on the lips. "I'll wait for you to come back," she said. Shen Luoan's heart was itching. He couldn't help it. He held her head with one hand and kissed her on the lips. His nimble and powerful tongue probed into her mouth and gently pried open her pearly white teeth. It pierced in slightly, tyrannically and greedily rolling her out, holding her tightly to him. His kiss was a little forceful. Shen Manting had never experienced such a feeling before. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. Chapter 2055. Shen Manting's heartbeat quickened, and she instinctively wrapped her arms around his waist. Shen Luoan couldn't help but push her against the door. Cough, cough. The woman's coughing successfully pulled him back to reality. When he released her, he noticed that her face was completely red. Wiping the water from the corner of his mouth, he lowered his head slightly. Shen Luoan's Adam's apple tightened when he saw her expression. Damn it! His body, which had been empty for 3 years, began to heat up uncontrollably. He looked behind Shen Manting and immediately saw Yi Qianqian. Yi Qianqian looked at him suggestively and said, "Big brother, isn't it a little inconvenient to do this at the doorstep? Why don't we return to our room?" Shen Manting's face turned even redder. She turned around and glared at Yi Qianqian shyly. She stomped her feet and said, "You're so mean." Her coquettish voice carried the annoyance and coquettishness of a young girl. Shen Luoan's heart melted as he listened. Yi Qianqian was stunned and subconsciously looked at Shen Manting's back. Then he couldn't help but sigh. It was indeed the consciousness of a little girl. Shen Luoan couldn't help but say, "Don't tease her. She's still young." Yi Qianqian replied, "Big brother, it really isn't appropriate to do it at the door." Shen Luoan was speechless. He turned around and said, "I'm going to work. Be careful on the road, big brother." Yi Qianqian waved at him. She closed the door and skipped toward her room. Shen Jilia was taking an afternoon nap. When he sensed Yi Qianqian enter, he didn't move. He looked up and breathed steadily. Yi Qianqian took off her shoes, lifted the covers, and crawled into bed. She reached over and hugged Shen Jilia's waist. She straddled his lap and called out, "Old Shen, get up." Shen Jilia didn't open his eyes. He flipped over in her position and hugged her face to face. Yi Qianqian felt a little defeated and continued, "Is it fun to dream?" Shen Jilia was speechless. "More fun than me?" Shen Jilia opened his eyes and asked, "Do you miss me?" Yi Qianqian's lips curled up, but before she could finish, Shen Jilia pounced on her like a wolf. "Ah!" Yi Qianqian screamed with laughter and shouted, "Wait! I have something to say." Shen Jilia pinned her under his body and held her firmly between his legs as he said, "I'm going to play with you now." "Wait a minute. I'm just kidding," Yi Qianqian exclaimed. Shen Jilia kissed her on the mouth and murmured, "It's too late." "Oh!" Yi Qianqian's words were completely swallowed by him. When she was feeling dizzy from the kiss, she pushed his face away and said, "Guess what I just saw?" "What?" Shen Jilia was tugging at her clothes, trying his best to pull them off and throw them away. However, after a few tugs, Yi Qianqian refused to cooperate. She frowned and shouted, "Get up for a second." Yi Qianqian arched her back, and Shen Jilia finally managed to pull the sweater off. "I saw Big Brother kissing Manting." Yi Qianqian wrapped her arms around his neck. "But Manting is obviously still a child. Doesn't Big Brother feel like he's molesting a child?" Shen Jilia's originally serious face couldn't help but burst out laughing. He lifted the blanket up and hugged her exposed head. He pressed his lips against her neck and whispered, "What are you thinking about? Sister Manting is 2 years older than me." "Oh, you didn't see it. She just... Oh." Yi Qianqian's words were cut off. Chapter 2056. At first, Yi Qianqian still had the strength to deal with his fierce attacks, but then she completely fell under his passion. Slow down." Shen Jilia worked very hard and didn't stop for a moment. When it was almost over, he whispered into her ear, "I want a child." Yi Qianqian narrowed her eyes and hugged him. Her eyes were wet and she whispered, "This is not a reason for you to indulge. Hurry. Get." Shen Jilia laughed out loud and kissed her more passionately. Shen Manting originally wanted to ask Yi Qianqian something, but when she walked to the door, she heard faint sounds coming from inside. He didn't deliberately try to cover it up. Even though his voice was pitifully soft through the door, Shen Manting could still hear him clearly as she stood close to the door. For some reason, her hand that was about to knock on the door suddenly stopped. His cheeks began to heat up slightly, and images that made him blush immediately popped up in his mind like a conditioned reflex. She obviously hadn't seen it, but she knew it clearly. Shen Manting withdrew her hand and turned to return to her room. She picked up her phone and after studying it for a while, she finally opened the browser. She saw 2 words. Search. She clicked on it, and a keyboard page automatically popped up. She touched it with her finger and poked a few times. She typed, "How to make your husband happy." She clicked on it, and the first line was, 10 little things to make your husband happy. After reading back and forth for a long time, Shen Manting blushed and closed the page. Shen Luo and came back very late that night. It was almost 11 p.m. When he opened the door, the room was dark. There was no doubt that the child had fallen asleep. However, when he walked in and was about to turn on the lights in the room suddenly lit up. Shen Luo and was startled. When he came back to his senses, he saw Shen Manting in her pajamas standing next to the switch. "Husband, you're back." Shen Manting went up to him. "Let me help you take off your coat." Shen Luoan was a little flattered and looked at her. Shen Manting had already reached out to touch his coat and smoothly took off his clothes. Then she hung up the coat and said, "Sit down for a while. I'll help you run the bath." Shen Luoan looked at her strangely and asked, "What's wrong?" When Shen Manting heard this, her cheeks became a little hot and she said, "I just want to help you run the bath." Then he walked in. The sound of running water came from the bathroom, and Shen Luoan's heart warmed slightly. Shen Manting walked in and sat beside the bathtub. She stared blankly at the clear hot water flowing down. When he heard the footsteps, he immediately stood up. Shen Luoan stared at her and walked in leisurely. "What's wrong with you today?" When Shen Manting heard his question, she lowered her head in embarrassment and said, "Nothing. I just want to be a good wife." She looked up at him with her clear eyes and said, "Hubby, from today onwards, I'm going to run the bathtub for you every day. I don't know how to make breakfast at work, but I can help you with your tie." As he spoke, the light in his eyes became even more mesmerizing. Shen Luoan stared at the cute little woman in front of him. His heart couldn't help but flutter. "I still have to learn how to make love lunchboxes." "Ah!" Shen Manting swallowed her words. She was startled by his sudden embrace. What's wrong?" Shen Luoan hugged her tightly. Shen Manting didn't know if it was an illusion, but she actually felt that. He was afraid. But wasn't he a man? What would a man be afraid of? Chapter 2057. Shen Luoan hugged her tightly. Shen Manting didn't know if it was an illusion, but she felt that. He was afraid. But wasn't he a man? What would a man be afraid of? Shen Manting didn't understand. She hugged the man and whispered, "Honey." The room was silent. There was only the sound of the bathtub running water in the bathroom. Shen Luoan hugged her and whispered, "Manting, I love you." His voice was very low, and there was an almost inaudible quiver in it. Shen Manting was slightly stunned when she heard this. She should be happy. But she didn't know why she felt a little sad. She felt that Shen Luoan was hugging her tighter. She groaned and whispered, "Honey, you're too tight. I'm uncomfortable." Shen Luoan released her slightly when he heard this. Shen Manting noticed that Shen Luoan's eyes were a little red. Her heart ached and she felt a little sad. Shen Manting pouted and looked at Shen Luoan. "Honey, what's wrong with you today?" "It's nothing." Shen Luoan combed her hair behind her ear and whispered, "I'm very happy." Shen Manting saw the slight smile on his lips and felt a little better. "Well, as long as you're happy. I'll do this for you every day in the future." Shen Manting smiled and put her hands on his shoulders. She stood on tiptoe and kissed him. "I love you too." After saying this, she felt a little sweet in her heart. With a smile on his lips, he quickly ran out. She held the door handle and looked at him deeply when she was about to close it. After a moment, she turned around and her heart was beating fast. "I'm in love," Shen Manting said to herself. Her face was hot and her mood was high. Shen Luoan stood in the bathroom for a long time before he turned to look at the bathtub. The water was running fast and it was almost full. "I just want to be a good wife." Her simple and shy words made Shen Luoan's heart beat faster. How nice. When he came out of the shower, Shen Manting was already asleep. He gently lifted the quilt and got into bed. Shen Luoan gently wrapped his arm around her waist. Shen Manting sensed his arrival and snuggled into his arms. She breathed heavily in his arms, relying on him and greedily. Shen Luoan smiled and quickly closed his eyes. The baby woke up early the next morning. A childish voice called out in a childish voice, "Daddy!" Shen Luoan woke up immediately. Shen Yuexiao was standing on the child's bed, leaning against the railing and looking at him pitifully. Shen Luoan subconsciously glanced at Shen Manting. She was still asleep, but he didn't know what she was dreaming about. There was a faint smile on her lips. Shin Luo stood up quietly, picked up his son, and walked inside. After her son was done peeing, she helped the little boy brush his teeth, wash his face, and change his clothes. Shan Manting slowly woke up after everything was done. When he stood up, he was shocked to find that the father and son were already neatly dressed. Looking at the time, it was already 7:30. She quickly got up and said, "Hubby, I woke up late. Why didn't you wake me up?" "Nothing much. Go back to sleep if you're tired." Shen Luo walked over with the baby in his arms. "Call me Mommy." "Mommy." The little boy reached out to Shen Manting. "Give me a hug." Shen Manting hugged him and said regretfully, "I wanted to help you shave and tie your tie, but I can't do that today." Shin Luoan's gaze softened. He held her chin and kissed her on the lips. Chapter 2058. Shen Manting's cheeks were pink, and she shrank back. When Shin Luoan saw her like this, he couldn't help but lean forward and say, "I don't mind." Shen Manting's face turned even redder. I mind." Then she glanced at Shin Luoan and the child and said, "I'm going to brush my teeth." After getting out of bed, Shen Manting hurried into the bathroom. She touched her face. It was burning hot. My husband is so dirty. I didn't even brush my teeth, and he kissed me just like that." Shen Manting looked at herself in the mirror and took a whiff of her breath. "It seems okay." After washing up, Shen Manting walked out and saw Shen Jilia playing with a tablet with the little boy in his arms. "Do you know what this is?" Shen Jilia whispered and pointed to a watermelon. "Tell me." Shen Yueshao looked at it for a long time, then pointed to it and said, "Eat." Shen Jilia smiled and rubbed his head, saying, "You know it's eat. You're smart. What about this?" "Mom." Xiao Yue called out. He was very excited to see Shen Manting. He struggled to get down from Shen Jilia's lap and shouted, "Mommy!" Shen Jilia put him down and sighed. "This little boy doesn't want me now that he has a mother. Little ingrate." Little Moon ran over and hugged Shen Manting with a smile. He jumped up and down and shouted, "Mommy!" Shen Manting picked up the little boy and was in a good mood. She looked at Shen Jilia and asked, "Where's my husband?" "Well." Shen Jilia was still very unfamiliar with the way Shen Manting addressed him. He lowered his head and touched his nose, saying, "He just went out. He should be in the garden." "Okay, thank you." Shen Manting walked out with Little Moon in her arms, looking very motherly. Shen Jilia looked at her back and said with a sigh, "You've really changed." "Right, I wasn't wrong, right?" When Yi Qianqian came out, she heard Shen Jilia's voice. She reached out and pulled him up to sit down, saying, "My father doesn't seem to be in good health recently. I called him, but he was either sleeping or coughing. I asked him what happened, but he didn't tell me. Old Shen, let's go back to Yuntown to see him." "Sure." Shen Jilia looked at her. "I'll drop by Kingstown on the way to see Lily's children." Yi Qianqian gave him a look of disdain. "You never forget to take care of the children wherever you go." Shen Jilia stood up and gently nudged her shoulder with his. He winked at her and said, "I like it." His feminine voice gave Yi Qianqian goosebumps. He rubbed his arms and hurriedly walked to the dining table. "Let's go tomorrow. I'm worried that Dad might get sick. You should ask for leave from the hospital." "So urgent." Shen Jilia picked up his phone. "All right, let's go. Tomorrow is Saturday. Come back on Wednesday." Yi Qianqian looked at him and smiled brightly. "Okay." How could Shen Jilia refuse? With a chuckle, he replied, "All right." When Shen Manting walked out with the baby in her arms, Shin Luo was indeed standing in the garden. He seemed to be pulling out weeds for an unknown plant. His movements were slow and elegant, and he looked like he was taking his time. "Daddy." Little Moon was already one step ahead of her and shouted. He swung his legs in Shen Manting's arms. The little boy wasn't heavy, but he was still quite strong. Shen Manting couldn't carry him anymore. She loosened her grip and bent down to put him down. Chapter 2059. Shen Manting couldn't help but rub her sore hands. Shen Luoan saw it and stood up, patted the dust off his hands and asked, "What's wrong?" "My hands are sore." Shen Manting rubbed her arms and glanced at Little Moon, who was squatting on the ground to pull weeds. "The little guy is quite heavy. Don't hold him for too long in the future." Shen Luoan patted the dust off his hands, reached out to hold her arm, and slowly rubbed it for her. "Your hand was injured, and it may be very uncomfortable if it bears heavy weights for too long." "Oh." Shen Manting bit her lip and chuckled. "I know. Let's go and take our son back for breakfast." "I want to go for a walk." Shen Manting looked at him. "Honey, take me for a walk. I haven't been around here much." In the past few days, Shen Luoan had driven her out. However, she had never been out of the neighborhood. Occasionally, she felt that the neighborhood was very familiar, but it was indeed very strange. Hearing Shen Manting's request, Shen Luoan glanced at her, and his heart was slightly moved. Take a walk in the neighborhood. If they walked in the neighborhood, they would inevitably pass by the small park and the basketball court. Shen Manting's desperate hysteria on that night 2 years ago still seemed to echo in his ears. He would never forget that look for the rest of his life. In the face of her expectant and longing gaze, Shen Luoan was a little afraid to look at it. Soon, he looked away. He looked at his son, who was squatting on the ground and playing with weeds, and said slowly, "Let's have breakfast first. There's nothing to see around here." "Oh." Shen Manting looked a little disappointed. "Then let's go in first." Shen Luoan didn't dare to look at her and responded in a low voice. When it was time for breakfast, Shen Jilia and Yi Qianqian were almost done. Shen Jilia stood up, and before he left, he suddenly remembered something and said, "Brother, I'm going back to Yun Town with Qianqian tomorrow. Don't go to the laboratory for the next 2 days. Stay at home with the child and sister-in-law." Sister-in-law. These 2 words came out of Shen Jilia's mouth, and it was indescribably pleasing to the ear. She couldn't help but glance at him and say, "Got it. You can go. You haven't been taking care of my child for long, so don't take credit here." "Hey," Shen Jilia wiped the corner of his mouth and said with a look of helplessness and disdain, "You're burning the bridge after crossing the river." Before sister-in-law woke up, Qianqian, Dad, and I took care of him together. You're always running around in the laboratory, and little you almost doesn't recognize his father anymore. Little Moon raised his head when he heard his name being called. He looked at Shen Jilia and then at Shen Luoan. Her little hand was holding a plastic spoon, and she was chewing on the porridge. Shen Jilia looked at him and clicked his tongue. "Look at your table manners. Look at how you're eating." Little Moon ignored him and lowered his head to continue eating. "That's enough. Let's go." Shen Luoan couldn't stand it anymore. "You're affecting my son's meal by standing here." Shen Jilia replied, "You're heartless." He left quickly. When Shen Jilia entered the room, Yi Qianqian was packing her clothes. When she saw Shen Jilia come in, Yi Qianqian didn't even look up and said, "It shouldn't be too cold in Yun Town. Oh, by the way, Tong Tong is getting married next month. She wants us to go together." "No," Shen Jilia said without hesitation. "What does her marriage have to do with me?" Chapter 2060. We're friends after all. Why don't we go when we get married? Yi Qianqian glanced at him. "You're a man. Why are you so petty?" "I'm not going." Shen Jilia looked as if there was no room for negotiation. "But who is she married?" "Oh, her colleague in the company. He looks quite honest." "You've met him?" "I've seen his picture." Yi Qianqian folded the clothes and put them in her suitcase. "I think he's pretty good." "Tisk, that's why I say you women only know how to bully honest people." "What did honest people do?" Yi Qianqian said. "Tong Tong is also very honest. Other than her current husband, she hasn't had a boyfriend." Shen Jilia didn't say anything and helped her fold the clothes. "What time is it? Aren't you going to work?" Yi Qianqian glanced at the time. "Buddy, it's 8:30. Shen Jilia placed the folded clothes on the bed and leaned over. "Kiss me." Yi Qianqian replied. "No. Kiss me." "No." Yi Qianqian turned her head away in disgust and stuffed the folded clothes into her suitcase. Shen Jilia leaned forward. Then I'll kiss you. As he said this, he leaned over and pinched her chin. Yi Qianqian's face was straightened, and she was kissed. Yi Qianqian's face was squeezed out of shape. She turned her head away, but Shen Jilia picked her up and threw her on the bed. Shen Jilia pressed his body down and held her hands in place as he kissed her. Let's go. Yi Qianqian was still firmly trapped. After struggling for a while, she simply gave up. When Shen Jilia was in the mood for kissing, he opened his mouth and bit her. Ouch! Shen Jilia didn't let go. He pulled away and said, "Are you really going to bite me?" Humph. Yi Qianqian didn't feel guilty when she saw him like this. She shouted, "Hurry up and go to work." "How dare you bite me?" Shen Jilia clenched his teeth. With a fierce look on his face, he rubbed his hands together and looked like a hooligan. He touched her waist and shouted, "I'm not going to work." Ah! Yi Qianqian screamed, but with a smile. "Go away, you pervert. You're committing adultery in broad daylight." "So be it." Shen Jilia lifted her clothes. "I'm coming." Yi Qianqian hugged his head and laughed. "In ancient times, you would be drowned in a pig cage." Humph. Shen Jilia responded with a groan. He opened his mouth and sucked on her soft, snow-white lips. However, just as he was about to eat, he heard a clear knock on the door. Both Shen Jilia and Yi Qianqian froze and turned their heads to look. The white door was ajar, and the knocking continued. Shen Luoan's voice could be heard. "Can you close the door a little? There are children inside." Yi Qianqian's face suddenly turned red. He kicked Shen Jilia away and said, "Be ****, how dare you not close the door?" Shen Jilia couldn't remember whether he had closed the door or not. After being kicked, his anger subsided a little. He straightened his clothes and got out of bed. Shen Luoan stood nearby, and Shen Manting's face was already flushed. Shen Jilia was a little embarrassed. He coughed lightly, and his cheeks were a little hot. He said awkwardly, "I was just joking. I'm about to go to work." Shen Luoan glanced at him. "You could have left a long time ago. You're a bad influence on children." Chapter 2061. Shen Jilia was even more embarrassed. He simply turned around and walked back without explaining. When he saw Yi Qianqian sitting there with a straight face, he coughed softly and said, "I told you not to stay at home. It's so embarrassing." Yi Qianqian raised her eyebrows and asked, "Who's to blame?" Shen Jilia said, "Me." Shen Jilia finally went to work. When he went out, Shen Luoan was not calm. His body, which had not been nourished for a long time, was extremely tense at this moment. In the past 3 years, he had also thought about it. But it had never been as turbulent as it was today. He tensed up and looked at Shen Manting. Shen Manting was too thin and looked like she did not have much flesh. And, no way. She would hate him. Shen Luoan took a long breath and walked back to the room. Shen Manting blushed a little, but when she saw him walking back to the room, she quickly followed him. Little Moon was squatting on the ground playing with a model plane, unaware of what had happened between the adults. Shen Manting called out, "Hubby." "Yes." Shen Luoan was very anxious, and when he saw her follow him in, he became even more restless. The anger that he had not felt for a long time surged, and the desire that had been suppressed for a long time was once again easily aroused. However, when he saw her innocent expression, he could only forcibly suppress his anger. He forced himself to calm down and looked at her asking, "What's wrong?" "I think Jilia and Qianqian are very happy. They look so happy every day." Shen Manting looked at him with a pair of sparkling eyes. She looked at him and said, "I think they are like a real husband and wife." When Shen Luoan heard this, he seemed to have read between the lines. He glanced at her and asked, "What do you think about us?" Shen Manting looked at him and said softly, "I don't think we are as husband and wife as they are. I always feel that something is missing." As she spoke, Shen Manting stepped forward and said, "That's why I think I want to be a good wife, but I still feel that something is missing." As she spoke, Shen Manting took another step forward. Shen Luoan hurriedly took a step back and looked at her. His body was even more tense. Shen Manting's fair face was flushed as if she had applied rouge. She looked particularly charming. Her appearance was so cute that it made people want to directly crush her. His Adam's apple tightened. He averted his eyes and said, "Don't let your imagination run wild. We're fine." "No, I think there's something missing." Shen Manting was usually quite obedient, but for some reason, she seemed very stubborn today. "I think you know what it is, don't you?" Shen Manting took a step closer. "Hubby, you must know why. If Jielia and Qianqian can play like that, why don't you play with me?" Shen Luoan stepped back, not daring to look at her. He walked to the door and said, "We're not children anymore. There's nothing fun here." Jielia and sister-in-law are still children at heart. We've grown up and are adults. We can't be compared to them. Shen Luoan noticed that her eyes had turned red. Shen Manting looked as if something extremely heartbreaking had happened to her, and soon, big drops of tears fell from her eyes. Jielia likes Qianqian, so he plays with her. You don't play with me because you don't like me, right? Shen Manting sobbed. You don't like me at all, do you? Her simple and innocent words silenced Shen Luoan. After reading it, you can go and read the new book. It's also free. The cute, handsome, and tough male lead, Big Lock. You won't be disappointed after reading it. It's so good. Chapter 2062. How could he not like her? It was precisely because he liked her so much that he was worried about her gains and losses. It was precisely because he loved her so much that he was afraid. Shen Luoan's chest ached, and the burning desire in his body subsided a little. The door of the room was open. Nanny he heard the movement inside and came over to take a look. She was a little worried. But soon, she turned around and carried the child. Shen Luoan clearly sensed the movement behind him. He looked at Shen Manting in front of him and sighed softly. He walked up to her and gently held her in his arms. Shen Manting sniffled, raised her hand to wipe her face, and hugged Shen Luoan tightly. "Manting." Shen Luoan's voice sounded a little drawn out, with a soft sigh. When Shen Manting heard his voice and felt the clear warmth in front of her, her tears stopped. She buried her cheek in his arms and answered in a nasal voice. "Hubby." It was a greeting and 2 words. Shen Luoan had heard it for several days, but he was still not used to it. He was very happy to hear such an affectionate greeting, which he had longed for a long time, come out of her mouth. Shen Luoan was a little greedy as he gently kissed her hair. Shen Manting was tickled by his kiss. It was a little comfortable, but also a little uncomfortable. She couldn't describe the feeling and subconsciously avoided it. Shen Luoan quickly released her and said softly, "I'm a little busy today. I have to go to the laboratory. You and the baby should be good at home." Shen Manting couldn't describe the feeling in her heart. It was a little sour and a little sad. However, his explanation made her feel a little less angry. Shen Manting nodded and put her hands on his shoulders. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed him gently on the lips. She said softly, "Come back soon." Shen Luoan was moved, and his heart was even more shaken. He looked at her deeply and only said one word, "Okay." Shen Manting looked into his eyes and felt that there seemed to be endless information in them. She couldn't understand it. But she could tell that he didn't dislike her. He liked her. Realizing this, Shen Manting smiled through her tears. She glanced at his clothes and said, "Hubby, I learned how to tie a tie yesterday. Shall I tie a tie for you?" "Ha!" Shen Luoan was a little surprised. "Who did you learn it from?" "There's a TV on the phone." "I learned from the TV on the phone." As Shen Manting spoke, she walked inside and found a man's tie that had been left unused in the cloakroom for a long time. The light red and dark red checkered tie looked very exquisite and formal. Shen Luoan was wearing very simple clothes. He didn't usually need to wear such formal clothes when he went to the laboratory. But when he saw her pick up her tie, he couldn't help but look forward to it. Looking at her expectant smile and her sparkling big eyes, he couldn't help but smile. He stroked her head and said, "Then I'll go change my clothes." Shen Luoan walked into the cloakroom. As soon as he took off his coat, he saw Shen Manting looking at him with a burning gaze. The fire that had just calmed down was once again easily ignited by her at this moment. His throat tightened, and he closed the door uneasily. When he came out, he had already changed into a formal suit. Chapter 2063. Am I handsome? Shen Luo glanced at his attire and smiled. It's not easy to hear a compliment from you. He. Shen Manting's eyes sparkled. She tightened her tie and said, If you like it, I'll praise you every day. As he spoke, he hopped forward and said, I'll help you with your tie. She was in high spirits. She stood on her tiptoes and put the tie around his neck. Shen Luo had never experienced such a feeling. This feeling of being treasured by her, desired by her, fawned over by her. His heart was filled with warmth as he stared at her fixedly with a pair of eyes. Shen Manting's face was flushed as she concentrated on helping him tie his tie. Like this. Shen Manting muttered to herself as she twirled the tie around, but it didn't seem right no matter how hard she tried. How can it be wrong? That's exactly what the TV said. She scratched her head, but when she looked up, she saw that Shen Luo was looking at her. She didn't know when it started, but that gaze seemed to want to need her deeply. Shen Manting blushed and said, I forgot how to do it. It's okay. Shen Luo looked at her. Take your time. Shen Manting nodded and continued to work. However, his unwavering determination just now had been defeated. Shen Manting felt her face getting hotter and hotter, and her movements became slower and slower. In the end, she couldn't take it anymore. She stomped her feet and said, Don't keep looking at me. I was so nervous that I didn't know what to do. Shen Luo chuckled and looked away. Then I won't look at you. Shen Manting didn't believe him and quietly lifted her eyes to peek at him. She realized that Shen Luo was really not looking at her anymore. It was as if he did not care at all. This feeling made Shen Manting even more unhappy. He flung his necktie and said, Forget it, I can't handle it. Shen Luo couldn't help but laugh. His heart was surrounded by a thick and sweet feeling. Looking at her little face, which was full of excitement just a moment ago, suddenly looking like a frosted eggplant, he actually felt very satisfied. He couldn't help but hug her. His actions were a little sudden. Shen Manting was shocked and froze. She looked at the frightened expression on his face. Manting. Shen Luo embraced her and called out softly, Manting. Ah. Shen Manting looked at him timidly and shrank back. She was a little uncertain and asked, Hubby, are you stupid? The smile on Shen Luo's face widened. He pinched her chin with his palm and swallowed her sweetness. Shen Manting only felt that it was a little sudden, but very quickly. Her body seemed to have turned into a pool of spring water, indescribably soft. Shen Luo gradually moved deeper and deeper, sweeping her out to be with him. His kiss very deep, very heavy. It was deeper and more dizzying than the last time. Shen Manting's hands unconsciously climbed onto his shoulders, and her whole body seemed to have lost all its strength as she hung onto his body. His body was getting closer and closer. Shen Manting could clearly feel his desire and passion. Between her waist and abdomen, a burning hot unknown object was pressing against her. It was a strange and unfamiliar feeling that made her a little uncomfortable. Shen Manting was a little curious. She put her hand down and touched it tentatively. In an instant, Shen Luo's entire body tensed up. Chapter 2064. Shen Luo's eyes were as deep as the sea, dark and bottomless. Shen Manting vaguely felt a sense of danger, and the sense of danger made her look forward to it. Shen Luo's tender hands were still resting on the bed, and he was so stiff that he was close to going crazy. Manting. Shen Luo's voice was low and husky. He pressed against her, and the deep desire in his voice moved her. Honey. Shen Manting suddenly felt a little scared, and she only felt that her palms were getting hotter and hotter. She quickly withdrew her hands, but she heard Shen Luo say in a low voice, Don't move. Shen Manting was shocked, and she didn't dare to move. At the same time, she looked at him in confusion and asked timidly, What? When Shen Luo saw her like this, he immediately felt an inexplicable sense of guilt. His originally tense body became more and more uncomfortable. Shen Luo closed his eyes, put her down and said hoarsely, Nothing. When Shen Manting saw that he was about to leave, she felt a little empty in her heart. She held his hand and said, "Honey." Shen Luoan was even more angry, and he suppressed the most primitive desire in his heart and looked at her. The lights in the cloakroom were not turned on. Compared to the outside, the light inside was very dim. Shen Manting's eyes seemed to be shining, and she looked at him, pulled his hand and said, "You just kissed me so happily." Boom. Her words were like the blazing sun that was shot out of the darkness. In an instant, the light around them suddenly burst, and Shen Luoan was even more unable to control himself. He held her hand and pulled her into his arms. Even Shen Luoan himself didn't know what he was going to do. It was completely a subconscious action, and when he came to himself, Shen Manting was already in his arms. Shen Manting looked up at Shen Luoan. Her pair of big eyes were full of doubt. Looking at Shen Luoan, she said softly, "Honey, you look so different today." Shen Luoan's throat was even more tight, and he asked hoarsely, "What's different?" "What's different?" Shen Manting couldn't say it, and facing Shen Luoan's burning gaze, her cheeks became even hotter, and she said, "It's different. Everything is different." But when he looked down, he saw the protruding bulge. She couldn't help but reach out and poke him. Shen Luoan, who was above her, immediately drew in a sharp breath. "Don't move." Shen Luoan's voice was low and hoarse. He seemed to be enduring it. "Don't move." Shen Manting was a little shocked. She quickly withdrew her hand and asked, "Dear, are you feeling unwell?" Uncomfortable. How could he be comfortable when he was already like this? Shen Luoan blushed and pressed her hand down. Shen Manting only felt a burning sensation on her skin. She looked up at him in confusion. "If I'm not feeling well, can you help me?" "Of course." Shen Manting looked at him. "I'll go get the medicine from Nanny He." As he spoke, he struggled to get up. But before she could move, Shen Luoan pulled her back. "You're my medicine." Shen Manting was stunned and looked at him. Then she said with some fear, "Hubby, are you going to eat me?" Shen Luoan's expression deepened. "Can I?" His voice was low and hoarse, and he asked with desire. Shen Manting looked at him and shrank back. She said, I heard that eating human flesh is not good for the body, and it's sour." You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.